I used to play a lot of hide and seek with my friends when we were young. A team version of the game though, so it was a little different. Instead of having a lone seeker who tags anybody, we would have a team of seekers and a team of hiders. And for the hiders to win, they would have to get to a certain checkpoint, and seekers would win if they tagged all the hiders. To tag one of the hiders, the seeker would have to two-hand touch their back, just like touch football. It started when we all formed our group on the block around 8 years old, all the way up until we were about 13. I lived in a cul-de-sac where there were 3 other houses besides mine, and kids my age lived in each one. There were also 4 other kids right outside the cul-de-sac around our age, so ever since I was little I had a group of neighboring friends. When we would play hide and seek, we would usually play in the cul-de-sac, since there was a lot of open space, trees, bushes, and each of the houses belonged to one of us, so we could use all the property space for the game as well. Plus, the cul-de-sac was right in front of our town's nature preserve park, so it also made it more fun to have the woods as an added hiding spot. It was 2008. I was 11 years old, a time and age we would still play hide and seek on Friday nights instead of going out to flirt with girls. We had only 6 of us this night, so we divided our 2 teams into 3s and split up. We were first to hide. The other team began counting down from 30, while we all went our separate ways to different houses. I ran to my next door neighbor's house and came up with a really creative idea. My friend had a green blanket outside on his patio sitting under a couple flower pots. I carefully moved the flower pots and took the green blanket, folding it over my body and crawling over to the bushes near the edge of the woods. Since our houses met the edge of the nature preserve, we could all choose if we wanted a back fence or not, and my next door neighbors chose not to have one, meaning the woods connected to some of our backyards. I heard the backyard gate open, so I quickly ran into the woods and knelt down under the green blanket. I would occasionally lift the blanket over my head to see who was there, and eventually I saw one of my friends creeping around the backyard, checking under the table and such. So while they were distracted, I waddled on my knees to the backyard of the next house over, where I could hear the commotion of one of my teammates getting caught. I lifted the blanket over my head to see what was going on, and I saw someone on the other team escorting my teammate back outside to the street. This was the perfect opportunity for me to run for it. I dropped the blanket completely and just looked around one last time before getting ready to make a break for it. Then, the most unexpected happened. The sound of a shoe on freshly fallen leaves and twigs snapped from right behind my ears, and before I could even turn around, I felt 2 hands grab my shoulders with a very strong and tight grip. I squealed in pain for a bit and screamed stop, managing to escape the grip and run for the checkpoint. I didn't make it to the checkpoint anyway though, because I ran into one of the seekers right at the backyard gates. We went out to the street where I found out that both of my teammates were already out, and the 2 other seekers were already waiting by the street. "Wait," I said. "If all of you guys are already out here, who was the one who found me in the woods?" I asked. They all looked at each other, seemingly confused. None of them owned up to it. They all swore they hadn't even gone into the woods. As I realized they were telling the truth, I felt my heart skip a few beats before pumping back up in a rapid beat, twice as fast as normal. When I told them that somebody was in the woods and grabbed me with force, they didn't believe me at first, but I convinced them. We all went to tell our parents, and the cops were called. Unfortunately for my neighbor friend, his parents put up a 4th fence wall, separating the woods to the backyard. We continued to play hide and seek and flashlight tag past this incident up until around the age of 13. Our parents just made us carry flashlights from now on and left all the backyard lights on. And of course, the woods were off limits. I'm happy to have such fond memories with friends as a young child, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that this was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. This happened when I was 10 years old. I lived in a small town in New York State that didn't have much going on at all. The house next door to mine was vacant for the longest time, until one day a moving truck pulled up in front, and a woman, a kid my age, and a toddler stepped out. Me and my dad had been sitting on the stoop talking, so we were able to go over and greet them right away. The mom seemed pretty normal, though there was something slightly off about her personality. My dad and the mom introduced me and the other boy my age to each other. He introduced himself as CJ, and then reached out his hand for a handshake, which for kids our age at the time was very weird. I shook his hand, and I remember both of our parents laughed. My dad ended up pressuring me on the spot to go hang out with CJ upstairs in my room. I wasn't against it, so I led him up to my room. I sat down on my bed, and he just stared at me blankly, creepily. I asked him if he wanted to play Mario Kart, and he didn't even know what that was. I showed him a few of my video games, and he said he doesn't like video games, so I suggested we play hide and seek outside. That he agreed to. I told him he could hide first to familiarize himself with the properties, while I gave him a 60-second head start. He ran into his new backyard, and I started counting down from 60. When it came time to find him, I found him in literally the most obvious place he could be. He was standing behind the chimney, a spot that I had to pass to get into the backyard. From this point on, I was starting to wonder if maybe this kid wasn't all there. After 10 minutes of an anticlimactic game of hide and seek, I said I had homework to do. He asked if he could come inside with me, and I didn't know what to say. Every excuse I came up with, he would find another way of asking to come inside. Eventually, however, he did leave me alone, and I went inside. Realistically, I had nothing to do. I just didn't like the kid and didn't want to further any kind of friendship with him. That night, something terrifying happened. I awoke to a thud at my bedside window. I sat up and lifted the window up. I was disturbed to see CJ's face at the upstairs window of the neighboring house. He leaned out his window and called out for me to come over and play hide and seek. I yelled over he's insane and told him to go back to sleep and leave me alone. I aggressively slammed my window shut, as well as the blind, and tried to go back to sleep. Two more times a rock or something was thrown at my window, but I ignored it. When it seemed to stop, I was relieved, and finally felt at ease. 10 minutes or so later, I heard a noise coming from below my window outside. It sounded like a bird was hopping around the ledge or something possibly. The sound kept getting closer though, and then I heard a thud come from right below my window. I didn't know what to think. What if CJ was out there? Was he trying to climb up to my window? The thought of it was so disturbing it was almost comical. Then I heard the slightest creak of the floorboards near my bedroom door. I turned to face the doorway and screamed at the sight of CJ standing at my door in his pajamas. He said in a quiet voice, "Let's play hide and seek." My dad was in the room quicker than I could even get out of my bed. He was just as shocked and disturbed as I was. He angrily marched over to the new neighbor's house with CJ in his grip. I watched the whole thing through my window. He raised his voice quite a few times. It turned out CJ simply entered through an unlocked window downstairs. My dad got a restraining order against the woman and her son. Unfortunately, they weren't going anywhere though. For months after this incident, I would have to awkwardly avoid eye contact with the mother next door the few times I saw her. Strangely, I never once saw CJ outside of the house again. However, every single night for over a month, I would check outside my bedroom window across to the other house and see CJ just sitting by his window looking into mine with his creepy blank stare. It got to a point where I eventually left the blinds to that window closed 24/7, and eventually it stopped. CJ and his mom moved out less than a year later, and luckily I never saw them again.
My dad has always been too nice of a guy, like a pushover. I'll just start the story with that. I don't say it for no reason. We live in uptown Chicago. We don't have a huge family, so our Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings are always small, like less than 6 people. This was Thanksgiving night of last year, 2019. Dinner was almost done already. My dad was picking up some last-minute foods like stuffing and cranberry sauce at the corner store since we didn't have any. My mom and I started setting the table, while my brother and grandparents sat at the table. My dad finally returned, but with more than just stuffing and cranberry sauce though. He brought someone along with him. It was this middle-aged, dirty-looking man in a green puffer jacket and black pants. He looked homeless. My dad introduced the man as Stefan, and said he would be joining us for dinner tonight. My brother and I exchanged surprised, uncomfortable looks. Then my mom and I did the same. As my dad started preparing the stuffing, he was telling us how he met Stefan alone in the cold streets, and said we as a Christian family should do the right thing and invite him into dinner, as no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. My grandma invited the man to sit with us. I could tell my mom wasn't comfortable with this as she whispered stuff in my dad's ear. Too late now though, the man was already seated at the table. Good thing I didn't sit next to him because I could smell his clothes from across the table. I didn't understand what my dad was thinking with this. When all the food was finally on the table, everyone sat down and we did our prayer. My brother and grandma attempted to hold hands with Stefan, but he didn't grab their hands back. I low-key watched him as we all prayed, and he just sat there, his eyes bulgingly wide, his mouth not moving. He just sat there like he didn't want to be there. After the prayer, we all began to eat, and at least 3 of my family members tried talking to him at some point. He didn't seem friendly at all though. His responses were very dry and one-wordish. It made the dinner a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what my dad saw in this man or why he felt comfortable bringing him into our home. I get trying to help the needy, but there was another way to do it than this. He helped himself to some food, but even the way he ate was really messy. Like his fingers were really greasy, some food got in his hair. It wasn't pleasant to watch. Now you may think I'm just trash-talking a homeless person, so let's move past that. Eventually Stefan said, "Excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom." My dad pointed him in the direction of the bathroom, which was down the half flight of stairs down the hall to the left. He got up, not saying thank you, and followed the directions. Once we were sure he was out of earshot, my mom and grandparents started asking questions like what the hell is wrong with my dad bringing that man in here? My dad whispered that he felt terrible and wanted to do something right. My mom questioned how we were going to get him out of here now. My dad insisted that we were being good people though, and that we'd agree eventually. We continued eating, till my brother asked, "Where is he? He's been gone a while." We all agreed it was strange, so my dad went down the stairs to the bathroom to look. He came back up a few seconds later saying he wasn't in the bathroom. My grandmas looked very distressed as my grandpa started cursing in Italian. My brother, my dad, and I started checking the whole apartment. My dad was calling Stefan's name the whole time. We checked all the bedrooms, all the closets. Somehow he wasn't anywhere. However, the window in my parents' room was open, enough for someone to climb through, so we assumed the obvious. My mom came in yelling at my dad that this is what happens for him being stupid and letting a potentially dangerous person into our home. We all had to agree, sadly. My dad closed the window, and we tried to go about the rest of our dinner normally. But of course, the whole time we talked about the bizarre encounter. After dinner, we had dessert. Then eventually my grandparents left. The 4 of us cleaned up the table and dishes, and a couple hours later, everyone dispersed to their rooms for bed. I'm being very loose with the time frame because this was almost a year ago, but I believe it was another hour later that I finally turned off my TV for bed. The silence in the room allowed me to hear it. The breathing. I heard it in my room, not my breathing. I was frozen stiff. I didn't even want to move or sit up. I didn't know where exactly in the room it was coming from. I just looked for the door to my room, trying to sum up the courage to run. I heard the faintest shuffling sounds, like of the fabric of a jacket, and I heard, almost in my ear, "Shh!" and a hand pressed down on my neck. That's when the scream I'd been building up exploded out of my mouth as I literally sprang out from the bed and into the hall calling for my dad. Everyone came out from their rooms and looked down the hall toward my room when I said Stefan's in there. Shockingly, Stefan stepped out from my room, looked at us, and walked out the front door as my dad yelled at him to get out. Of course, without getting physical because he's a big softie. Stefan was long gone by the time police finally showed up. The police said the important thing was that he left and none of us were hurt, and now just to make sure to lock the door and windows. They took our description of Stefan and they left. I like to think my dad learned his lesson from that. You can't trust everyone you meet. For Black Friday a few years ago, I went to Best Buy. Well, technically it was midnight the night before Black Friday. My local Best Buy is always open late the night before Black Friday. I went with my best friend Taylor to look for a new laptop and maybe whatever other stuff caught my eye. We split off to look for our own things. While browsing the laptop section, someone in a blue Best Buy shirt approached me asking if I needed help. I gave him specific specs I was interested in, and he started looking around with me. He showed me one laptop he claimed he really liked, then asked me what it was I'd be doing with the laptop. I found it to be a slightly odd question, but maybe it was part of his sales pitch. I said just for school and general web browsing kind of deal. After this point though, he seemed more interested in me rather than helping me. Like he was asking a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from, where I go to school, etc. I don't want to sound self-absorbed, but I do get a decent amount of male attraction when I go out. Anyway, I started realizing he seemed to be hitting on me, and I found him overall creepy, so I reminded him politely about the laptop and that I was in a hurry. He was relentless though. He actually asked for my phone number after that. I made it clear to him I was uninterested. Luckily, I locked eyes with Taylor, who happened to be walking over, and I mouthed the word help to her. She understood, and she came over and called my name, saying, "Come and hurry." I said, "Sorry, I have to go," to the creepy guy, and followed Taylor away. We walked to the other side of the store. I told her I didn't want to see that guy again. He was obsessive and creepy and didn't get the hints. We left the store after that with plans of going shopping elsewhere tomorrow. We were both starving though, so we went to the nearby diner, which is open 24/7. We sat at a booth and looked at the menu. The place was practically empty at this hour, except for a lone man sitting at the bar, seemingly looking at the menu as well. His back was to me. I didn't notice him there 5 minutes earlier. He was in a gray jacket, but I recognized his hair. I whispered to Taylor to look at him. As we looked at him, he tried to subtly turn to look at us, but when he realized we were already staring, he looked away. It was him, the Best Buy worker. "Oh my God, he followed us," I whispered. "Let's go," I said, and we got up and left the diner. We hurried to my car, and I drove us home to my house as fast as I could. Taylor was sleeping over that night. To put it short, eventually there were 3 slow knocks on the living room window. We both shrieked and didn't know what to do. "My apartment is on the bottom floor. It's him," we kept saying. We went to the window, but oddly couldn't see outside, like total blackness. The view of outside was blocked. We were too creeped out. We had to call the cops. When we got a knock on the door from police, we immediately felt safer. So it turned out the reason we couldn't see out the window is because a shirt was hung over the window, blocking view in or outside. Not just any shirt, a blue Best Buy shirt. Pinned to the shirt was a post-it note that said, "I don't work at Best Buy, bitch." So the police recommended I file a harassment charge, but the problem was I didn't know his name or who it was. They said I could get a lawyer and get the surveillance footage from Best Buy to find the guy, but it sounded like a lot of work. I let it go, but I stayed at Taylor's apartment for a few days. I still can't believe that guy followed us all the way to my house. Some people are dangerously crazy.
My two kids, Sam and Robbie, are twins. They're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living at our old house, but something happened that led to us moving. It's a long, awful story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Carol and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even still, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future, until this happened. We were a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was covered by a bunch of tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, however, his name was Steve. He had just moved there less than a year ago at the time. I had only ever spoken with him a couple of times. Both times I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just overall didn't seem like the friendliest guy. 2 of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't much privacy, but whatever rooms the 2 windows were that overlooked the backyard, I had never seen the lights on in either of them, so I always assumed it was an unused guest room or something of that nature. One day in the summertime, Sam and Robbie were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool and with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. There came a certain point where I was walking towards the detached garage, and then I saw Steve next door at his window for a second. Only half a second after noticing him did he turn and walk away from the window. It was slightly odd for sure, but I left it alone. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they went back in their blow-up pool while Carol and I were in the kitchen as she was making dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Robbie came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him to the backyard to ask him to show me what he was talking about. He pointed to one of Steve's upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard, and he said there was a white light that kept coming from that window. I right away assumed the worst, and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it's time to dry off and come inside. So I helped them dry themselves, and then brought them in, where I went to tell Carol about this. She right away assumed the worst just like me. She said I should go next door and knock on Steve's door. So I did. But when I did, he never answered the door. His car was even in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Carol he wasn't opening up, which made what the kids said seem even more credible. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids were seeing was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Carol and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Carol wanted me to go check outside, so I stepped out into the backyard and looked around. I had on all the lights as I searched. I found nothing and nobody, but I noticed the lights in Steve's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took this time to also ask him bluntly if he had by chance been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction to this was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended to my asking this, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Again, without proof, I couldn't, nor did I want to, start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Carol was not happy about this, saying he's full of shit. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Carol shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room confused at first, but then when I heard the kids screaming from their room, I exploded from the bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Robbie was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had awoken Sammy, who was crying and screaming in reaction to him. Robbie said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, what did he look like? He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Steve's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house, and I found him. He, just like me, was peeking out one of the upstairs windows, in that same room that overlooks the backyard. I stormed outside next door and rang his doorbell like 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Steve,
That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming outside when I'd be out there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids anyway. About 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment with 2 other women so I could attend college. There's a list of things that make the building we live in not that great. For example, most apartment rooms face the corridor, where people from the same floor as you will constantly walk left and right to get in or out of the building. So if you keep your windows open, anyone pacing outside can see into your room. But considering I spend most of my time at college, and the girls I live with and most of the neighbors are really nice, the things on that list don't really bother me that much. A few nights ago, while getting ready to go to bed, I could hear music playing from somewhere, mostly pop songs from the 2000s. Since we live in a student-friendly city full of frat houses and the likes, I thought nothing of it. There were probably a bunch of parties going on and the sound was coming from one of them, or maybe it was just some drunk friends listening to it on the street. I got into bed and let a random video play on my phone so I could fall asleep, as I often do. But as I was starting to doze off, I started to hear drilling noises. At first, I thought I was just sleepy and hearing things, or maybe it was coming from my phone, but I paused the video and listened closely. There was definitely someone using a drill somewhere nearby. I got up and walked around the apartment feeling confused. It was around 11 p.m., so there was no way that someone could be working still. The sound was louder at my bedroom window, so I opened it to check, and quickly realized that it was coming from the neighboring apartment, the one that's closest to my window. At that moment, I realized that music was also coming from there. No one lives in that specific apartment, so my confusion only grew. But then I figured maybe someone had planned to rent it, talked it over with the landlord, and he ordered for something in it to be fixed. Still, the fact that they were doing it so late into a Thursday felt really strange. I went back to trying to sleep, but they wouldn't stop making noise. I was texting a friend and eventually started complaining about it, sending him audios and even a video directed at the window that all the noise was coming from. He said I should call the police because there was no way it was legal for someone to be doing this, especially in a building full of apartments. I decided against it since I just wanted to get some rest, and it was already past midnight by then. I forced myself to sleep through the drilling sounds, but a little past 1 in the morning, I woke up again, this time to hammering. Feeling stressed, but not enough to take action just yet, I tried to sleep once more, only to wake up again. This time, I didn't even check what time it was. I was totally fed up. So I just put on a robe and made my way to confront whoever it was. The window to the apartment was open, so I decided to talk to those people from there. The window was located above the stairs though, so I would have to go down a few steps to get into view, and I'd look even shorter being seen from there. But that was the last thing on my mind. As soon as I got to the window, I felt most of the courage leave me. In that room, there were 4 men, who all seemed to be around their 30s or 40s, and they all stopped whatever they were doing to look at me. Now, only the song coming from the radio could be heard, and somehow it felt chilling to have all those other noises stop so abruptly, because even though that's everything I wanted just seconds earlier, I definitely didn't want to be the one thing these 4 men were focused on. Another thing that bothered me, but I didn't think about until the next day, was those men's peculiar choice of music. It just felt creepy to realize that middle-aged men were listening to stuff that teenagers or even preteens would be listening to. Anyway, none of them looked shocked to see me. They just had puzzled, "What's that?" looks. Remembering why I was there in the first place, I said, "Excuse me, it's pretty late and most people here have work early in the morning. If it's not too much to ask, can you guys do this some other time?" Now, mind you, I'm a pretty short and puny 19-year-old who didn't even think to put on something other than a robe. So when 2 of those 40-something-year-old men came to the window and towered over me, looking up and down at my body, almost like predators, I froze up and felt the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. They were both sweaty and had their mouths agape, and one of them had a hammer that looked quite heavy in his hand. They started smiling in a sick, twisted way, and I felt a sudden urge to throw up. Extremely unsettled, I started slowly making my way back to my apartment, not taking my eyes off the men, feeling like they might try to grab me when I got to the last step of the stairs and close enough to the window. As soon as I was out of their view, I dashed to my front door, got inside, and locked it. One of the girls who lives with me was out of town that night, and I presumed the other one was asleep, since she hadn't seen my text on our group chat asking them if anyone had moved into that apartment. I got back into my room and didn't hear any tools again. In reality, even the radio seemed to have been turned off. I wasn't really sure how to feel about that because now I wasn't angry, just disgusted and creeped out. I know I should have called the cops by then, but I was just too stressed to deal with that any longer. Checking the time, it was about 2:15 now. I got into bed again, tricking myself into thinking I wasn't scared, just craving some sleep. Eventually, I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night again. This time it was around 3:30, and I could hear no sounds coming from the apartment. Everything was quiet, and that quickly started to bother me. It was too quiet. I had to have heard or felt something in order to wake up. The silence was making me uneasy, and I had a feeling that someone might have been on the other side of my closed window. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't get a peaceful sleep after that. The next morning, as I was going out, I went past the same window and noticed that it was closed. It was as if this previous night had never even happened. But I asked the girl who was home with me if she heard anything. She said she had woken up several times during the night, but couldn't get up and do something about it due to sleep paralysis. Either way, that confirmed I wasn't delusional. Those people really were there. But then, how did they have the keys to the building and that apartment? Why did it seem like they didn't want to be seen during the day? What were they thinking of doing to me or maybe any passerby? It's been a week now, and thankfully I haven't seen those men again. Still, I have no idea who they were or what they were doing, and I'm honestly scared to even think about the possibility that they might come back, or still be lurking around somewhere. I live in a pretty basic suburban town on Long Island, New York. My girlfriend Sarah and I recently started renting a small house perfect for 2 to 4. We have a decent-sized backyard, and our house is on a very quiet street. One side of our house has a water drainage basin, as the county calls it, which is just a bunch of trees surrounding a sump. On the other side is our neighbor Kyle, who lives with his wife. They're a bit older in their 60s and quiet. Then directly across the street is a little patch of woods that's in front of another water drainage basin. So for people who like privacy out front, our house is perfect. But then there's the backyard. Kyle's house is blocked off by some bushes that the landlord planted years ago. So besides the house directly behind us over the fence, there's no other houses that could see into the yard. However, that one house looking into our backyard was all that it's taken to genuinely make Sarah and I uncomfortable. As I'm writing this, it's currently the fall, so we've been doing fall cleanup the past few weeks in the front and backyard. I started noticing anytime we were out there were these 2 people standing at the upstairs window of the house behind us. It was a middle-aged man and woman. When I'd look up to that window, they'd keep looking and watching me. It got really uncomfortable to the point we'd pretend not to notice it, but we could only stomach doing this for so long. The leaves kept falling day by day, and the fall cleaning would need to continue. Sarah wouldn't want to be in the yard anymore because she was getting so creeped out at those 2 people who would watch us out the window without fail. So one foggy day while raking, I looked up at the window and once again, the 2 were standing at the big rectangular window. I decided to wave at them, see if they'd wave back. After a few seconds of smiling and waving, they didn't move. No reaction. But I could feel their stares and I could see their eyeballs looking at me. I turned away from the window and tried to continue raking, but after sneaking a peek back at the window a couple minutes later and seeing them still there, I felt too awkward and weird being out there. I went inside. Sarah said we should go over and introduce ourselves. At first, I was hesitant of that, but I was persuaded to walk around the block with her to that house and ring the bell. We expected one of those people at the window to answer the door, but instead, the door cracked open, just enough to see half of a person's head. It didn't look like either of those people who were always at the window. It was also super dark in the house, to the point that it looked incredibly ominous and uncanny staring at half of that person's face. This guy looked a lot younger, like in his 20s. Sarah and I tried to be friendly and introduce ourselves.
The guy seemed very closed off though, and not interested in speaking. He had a very "what do you need" type of attitude about him, and when I asked if he lives with anyone else here like his parents, he said no. I mentioned the man and woman who were always at the window upstairs, and the guy on the other side of the door said he doesn't know who I'm talking about. Sarah and I felt really unsettled, so we just left. But weirdly, as we walked down the walkway back to the sidewalk, I noticed the guy behind the door was still peering half of his face through the cracked open door. I'm sure he watched us walk away until we were out of sight. That interaction was weirder and creepier than we were expecting. When we got back home, I went upstairs to our room. The upstairs of our house is only our master bedroom and the bathroom. It has 2 windows. One of the windows looks over to that house over the fence, and I looked out the window to see those 2 people looking out the window again, and even at this distance, I felt like they were staring right at me. I shut the blinds and went down to tell Sarah. We agreed it was time to plant some arborvitaes to block their window from view. The only problem is it's already the fall and it's too late to plant any kinds of trees. We have to make it through winter. After a few days of not looking outside the bedroom window or going into the backyard, one night we heard a strange knocking sound from downstairs. I told Sarah to wait in bed while I went downstairs. The knocking got louder, and I quickly discovered it wasn't the sound of knocking on one of the doors, but rather on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds of it were of course shut because we didn't want those creepy people looking into our living room at night. I approached it, and yes, it was 100% a fist knocking on the glass. I considered saying, "Who's there?" but I froze and I was too scared. Instead, I flicked on the backyard light, and then the knocking stopped. I didn't even want to look out the window or door. I kept the light on and then went back upstairs to my room, where I told Sarah about the creepy knocking, but I claimed that I chased whoever it was away. I exaggerated in fear of sounding like a coward. I also didn't want her to worry. We both imagined it to have been something to do with that house though. Nothing has happened since, but I'll have to update throughout the winter. Update. It's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen those people at the window ever since. But last night, we heard yelling and screaming from that house. I had to open our window, and it became clear there were muffled yells coming from that house. The fact that we heard it through 2 sets of closed windows just goes to show how loud the yelling was. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped and went quiet. We almost called the police, but ultimately didn't. I'll update again if anything else happens, but we're really getting creeped out here now.
My first big skiing trip ever was with my friends Angel, Amy, and Jessica, and we all flew to Colorado. We all rented an Airbnb in the town of Snowmass, right by Aspen Mountain Ski Resort. I had only been snowboarding one other time in my life at this point, and that consisted of riding down the bunny hill over and over. I was pretty bad. First thing we did from the airport was Uber straight to the Airbnb. It was a spacious 4-bedroom house. It had a huge deck with a hot tub on it overlooking the Colorado countryside. Since it was nighttime already by the time we got there, we went out to some local bar on the first night, which was a Thursday. The next day we went straight to the mountain via Uber. We got our rental equipment at the mountain to make things easier. It actually wasn't super crowded on the first day, probably because it was a work day. The next day it got a lot more crowded. For some reason I just couldn't really get the hang of it. I couldn't make it down a slope without falling at least a few times. At a certain point, I was so fed up that I just sat on the side of a slope to catch my breath and take a break. Meanwhile, a bunch of people zoomed past me, even little kids that made it look easy. Then came this man who seemed like he didn't really know what he was doing either. He came up to me and asked if I'm okay, and he started trying to make conversation with me. It was the weirdest spot to make conversation, so after a few seconds of answering his questions, I got up and said "nice talking to you," and resumed trying to snowboard down the mountain. This mountain was a blue run, meaning it was a longer slope to get down and slightly more difficult than a green. I stopped again a little further down the mountain to take another break. I really wasn't having fun. To my dismay, I saw that guy from before approaching me again. He was inching closer to me with the same struggle I had been dealing with. He stopped right next to me and unstrapped from his snowboard, then sat a few feet from me. He started talking to me about how he's not used to so many pretty girls like me being here. This was super weird because I had on a ski mask and helmet. My face was practically covered. He asked who I was here with. I lied and said my boyfriend. He laughed and said he saw me come here with all girls. I looked at him and said ew really loud, and then got back on my snowboard and continued down the mountain. It's weird, but I snowboarded better than I ever had in that moment, perhaps because I had the proper motivation to just get down the mountain. When I got to the bottom, I immediately went to the lodge and sat at one of the tables, calling each of my friends. Amy was the first one to pick up. I explained what just happened and asked her to just come sit with me. A few minutes later, I saw her walking over to me. I had already texted our group chat saying we should leave. It was already around 3 o'clock anyway, we'd been there a few hours. When Angel and Jessica finished whatever run they were on, they met us back at the lodge. We returned our rental gear and then Ubered back to the Airbnb. We all showered and changed and then headed out to the village for dinner. We then went out to a few of the local bars afterward, and we got decently drunk. When we came back to the Airbnb, we all four went into the hot tub on the deck and drank more alcohol. After a while of that, we all eventually went to our rooms to go to sleep. I'm basically an insomniac, and I stayed up on my phone for over an hour scrolling on TikTok, even as I was still buzzed. I wasn't tired, and this was a very, very good thing that may have saved us. I heard footsteps out in the common area, either the living room or the kitchen. The Airbnb had wood floors throughout. Initially, I thought it was one of the girls going to the bathroom or getting water, but then I heard the doorknob to my door twisting. I sat up and was about to say one of their names, but I stopped myself because why would one of them be trying to come into my room? I instantly went to the group chat to text everyone and ask who that is. Nobody answered. They must have been asleep. I tiptoed to the door and put my ear up against it. I heard footsteps moving around. When it went quiet, I ever so quietly unlocked the door and twisted the doorknob. I pushed the door open as gently as I could, and I peeked into the living room. I looked from corner to corner until I saw a tall black silhouette walking from one door to the other. It was a man for sure. He was trying to get into one of our rooms. I wanted to scream out to my friends to warn them, but I stayed silent because I was too scared. I closed my door quietly and locked it. I prayed to God everyone had their doors locked. 4 girls in one Airbnb though, of course we did. I called 911 quietly and whispered the entire time into the phone. That's when I heard the light knocks on my bedroom door. I turned to the door and watched as the doorknob again started to turn, but he couldn't open it. I kept saying please hurry into the phone. All the woman on the line kept saying back is they're almost here and to remain quiet. It was entirely possible that the man on the other side of the door heard me whispering because he started pushing into the door. I heard shoves and bangs on the door and I just couldn't help it anymore. I screamed get out of here, followed with I'm on the phone with 911 right now. The bangs stopped and a voice on the other side said, okay sweetheart. And then I heard his footsteps walking away. The 911 operator instructed me to stay in the room until police should arrive. I peeked outside the window, but it was simply too dark to see anything beyond a few feet in front of the window. My friends were awake now from my screams. I told them all to stay in their rooms. Police finally got there about 5 to 10 minutes later, and they came right into the Airbnb since the door was unlocked. Once it was confirmed the intruder was gone, we ensured every entry point was locked and secured, and they left. Sleeping after that was difficult. Of course, the idea came up that it was that creepy man from the mountain who was following me, and I do believe that's a possibility. The voice could have been a match, honestly. After working out a partial refund with the Airbnb host, we spent Sunday traveling the area instead of snowboarding again, and we stayed at a small motel Sunday night. We flew home Sunday morning. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me in life that you should not be scared of ghosts, fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was just going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog Midnight, and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with Midnight in the snow and snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs, PlayStations as entertainment, I was quite content, and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. The 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games, and watching DVDs. That day it was a pretty heavy snowfall, so instead of hitting the slopes, I stayed in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had just been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The footprints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in the bed and stayed silent. I was honestly freaked out, and I could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit, well fine, I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright, maybe there's some forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this, I didn't want to chase anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in my bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time, I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. As soon as I went outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Was it all in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It looked really tall, like 8 or 9 feet, and it was really fucking skinny. It was squatted on one branch, and its freakishly long, white arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it, while its mouth was wide open with no expression. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open that door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head, telling me to stay in bed and don't do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning. It didn't take me long to pack everything and get the hell out of there. My family owns a property in Vermont that we use in the wintertime for skiing and snowboarding. It's at the top of a hill surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbors are up the road, but separated enough where you can't see their houses from our property. There's a big shed outside that we keep a lot of our snowboarding gear, along with general lawn care stuff like shovels, rakes, and everything like that. We keep the shed locked whenever we aren't up there. Once we unlock it though, we keep it unlocked for the entirety of our visits, as we don't really worry too much about people coming and stealing anything while we're there. The actual house is pretty nicely sized. It's technically 3 floors, with the 3rd floor being a loft master bedroom, which is reserved for my parents, and my siblings and I aren't allowed to use it. This one weekend, I was heading up there with this girl Melissa, who I was going to be teaching how to snowboard, as she'd never been before. We had a beginner board up there that she used, along with all the proper equipment. On our property, since it's on a steep hill, we actually made our own little custom slope that we'd sometimes snowboard or sled down for fun. So before taking her to the actual mountain, I suggested I teach her the basics on the hill. We put on all of our gear, and right up at the top of the hill, I slowly started descending, showing her the basic movements. When she made her first attempt, she right away fell as expected, but she was persistent and kept trying and getting back up. Each time we made it to the bottom of the hill, she'd get a little better, and then we'd walk back up and do it again. At some point, we both heard a male voice call out from the woods, presumably at us. It said, "Hello." We start looking around, confused as hell. All we saw were a bunch of trees and a white sheet of snow covering the floor of the woods. You'd think it would be easier to spot someone or something when it's just a sheet of white surrounding you. But nope, we didn't see anyone in the woods. I yelled out, "Is someone there?" Nothing now. Just the dead silence of a secluded place in the winter. Melissa and I were slightly disturbed, so we walked back up to the house and went inside. I didn't think it could be the neighbors because I didn't see the driveway to the one we passed shoveled, and the neighbors further up the hill would have no reason to come down like that. I told her it must have been some random person going for a hike in the woods. That was the least scary possibility. Next thing we did was go out to my favorite nearby diner. Then we went shopping for basic groceries to get us through the next few days. Since it was a bit late now, we were going to spend the rest of the night just chilling at the house. We ate dinner and then chilled by the fire pit out back. At some point, we both heard the distinct sound of shoes stepping in snow not far away. I turned off the music for a second, but with the sound of the crackling fire, it still wasn't dead silence. By this point, whatever we heard stopped. I asked for her phone so I could use both my and her phone's flashlights to point into the woods. Again, like earlier, I called out, "Is someone there?" which scared Melissa. She asked to go inside, so we did. We didn't go back outside that night. The next morning, I woke up to Melissa getting out of bed. I was still tired, so I went back to sleep, and when I woke up again, she was still not in the bed anymore. I looked at the time and it was already like 9 a.m., so I got up and opened the curtain to the window. I looked out at the shed outside. The door was open, and I saw the breath of someone being blown from behind the door to the shed. I wondered what Melissa was doing out there. I opened the window and yelled Melissa's name, but when she called back, her voice came from inside the house, right in the living room. I got goosebumps. I kept watching the escaping breath of whoever was in our shed blow out the door. I yelled outside, "Yo, who's in my shed?" And a few seconds later, I shut the window and ran out to the living room to find Melissa watching TV. Or rather now, she was more so just standing in front of the couch, concerned. I looked out the back door and saw the back of somebody dressed in black running into the woods. I looked for my boots, but by the time I put them on, it was too late to chase him. I went to check the shed to see if anything was stolen, but it seemed everything was there. I relocked the shed just to be safe. I saw the footprints of that person lead from the woods to the shed, then back to the woods again. I wasn't about to follow the footprints though. After nerves calmed a bit, we ate breakfast, then headed for the mountain, and we had a whole day of snowboarding. Melissa picked it up surprisingly well, and we plan to have one more day at it tomorrow. After we got back to the house, we cooked a steak dinner, then watched a movie. We didn't want to sit out in the dark again after last night and earlier that day. In the middle of that night, I woke up to Melissa shaking me. She explained why. Then she told me to listen. We sat in silence for about 30 seconds before we heard, "Help me," in a very long, drawn-out voice from outside. Melissa was in hysterics. Then we heard the voice again. I went over to the window, and she begged me not to open the curtain. I said I was just going to take a peek. I gently lifted one corner of the curtain to peek outside. I don't know what I was expecting to see, except for total blackness. I cracked the window open, and a gust of cold air hit me in the face. I listened, intending on getting a better idea of where this voice was coming from, and then I suddenly heard footsteps in the snow, getting much louder very quickly. They were coming toward the window. I quickly pulled it down and relocked it. Whoever it was already saw me though. The knock on the window confirmed it. I looked over at Melissa, who was hiding under the blanket, making faint crying noises. I told her to just stay quiet. Our best response was to not respond or acknowledge them. There was never another tap at the window, nor were there any more calls from outside. It was a long couple hours after that of not sleeping. Eventually though, we got so tired that we did end up just falling asleep. The next morning, I checked around the house, and there were footprints literally surrounding the house. Someone or multiple people had been circling the house, apparently going from window to window. We decided we'd leave early, because clearly someone was stalking us from the moment we got there. I locked everything back away in the shed, then we packed the car, and back to Rhode Island we went. For those curious, nothing was broken into or stolen the next time any of us went back up there, so truthfully, I don't even really have a guess as to what that person out there wanted. But it was most definitely the same person stalking the house from the moment we got there. It might have been multiple people, and when you're up in an isolated place like that, realizing you're not alone is the scariest thing imaginable.
As you're about to hear in the following stories, mental health is not something to be taken lightly, and it's important to stay on top of your mental health. You grow up imagining your life will look a certain way at a certain age, but things don't always work out the way you pictured. Maybe you don't end up in the job you thought you would. Maybe you're feeling stuck, or like everyone else is moving forward while you're just standing still. It can be hard to talk about that, even harder to ask for help. Maybe therapy always feels like something other people did. But then I learned that it's not about having something wrong with you. It's about understanding yourself and finding a healthier way to move forward. That's where today's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist after a short questionnaire, often in just a couple of days. And if it's not the right fit, you can switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Go to betterhelp.com/Mr. Nightmare to get 10% off your first month. The link is also in the description.
So a little backstory. I dated this girl when I was in my senior year of high school. I'm 20 now, so it was a couple of years ago, but still pretty fresh in my mind. For privacy's sake, I won't use her real name, so I'll refer to her as Grace. Grace and I met through our job, which I now know is never ideal. Before we started dating, though, there were red flags that I simply shouldn't have ignored. For instance, she would come to our place of work for hours just to watch me work, and I would catch her staring at me every once in a while. Besides that, a few months into our relationship, things started getting pretty toxic. I would constantly feel suffocated. I had no time for my hobbies, friends, or even myself. She was the type of girl to ask where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing 24/7. If I didn't answer a phone call, it would end up being 25 missed calls and a ton of text messages that would ultimately turn into a fight, even if I was just using the bathroom. It got to the point where I couldn't play games with my friends without it causing a fight, so eventually we broke up, but not without her doing everything in her power to convince me to come back. She would wait outside my place of work for me to get off, and when I would walk outside, she would follow me to my car, block me from getting in, and try to reason with me. I got sick of it. One night she came and wanted to talk, so I decided to talk with her, not really knowing what else to do. Grace was also trying to sue me for something extremely petty that I'd rather not get into, and would use this as a scare tactic to make me talk to her. So anyway, I sat down in her car. She was saying the same old stuff I'd heard hundreds of times. I told her I was done talking, but at that time, her dad called her. She used this as a threat and told me, if you don't sit here and talk to me, I'll have him sue you now. And to that, I said, fuck this, and attempted to get out of her car. The door was locked though, so as I was unlocking it, she grabbed hold of my arm and dug her nails into my skin. I looked at her and was genuinely shocked because she'd only been verbally abusive before, never physical. I had also never seen that look on her face. It was pure malice, and I won't lie, I was pretty unnerved. I myself am a pretty tall guy, and she was very small, so I knew I could overpower her if I had to. I swung her door open and tried to step away, but she was holding me extremely tight. I told her to let me go, but she wouldn't budge. I kept pulling on my arm, trying to get away, but she would not move an inch. At this point, my skin was starting to peel, so I made a judgment call and pulled her toward me onto the passenger seat, which gave me enough time to get away and into my car. I drove home faster than I ever have, and I really wish I could say it ended there, but of course it doesn't. Unfortunately for me, Grace and I are practically neighbors, and she lives a couple blocks away. That night, while I was playing video games, I heard a car outside, but I kinda chalked it up to my game as I remember playing GTA 5 that night. I had also smoked a bit of weed, so I figured that would have made the car noises louder. A little bit of time passed, and as I was playing, I heard a tap on my window. I thought I was being paranoid, as weed can tend to make me a little on edge sometimes, especially after what had happened. But that thought quickly faded after I heard another tap and a female voice saying my name. I knew it was Grace, and I started to panic. My window doesn't have the best blinds, so I knew she could see me. I didn't want to open my window because at this point, I knew she could be potentially dangerous. I pretended not to hear her, hoping that she would go away. But of course, she didn't, because after a minute or two, she started banging on my window. Her tone changed from soft and apologetic to more aggressive and angry. I couldn't make out much of what she was saying, but it was something along the lines of, "You can't do this to me, you're an asshole," that sort of deal. I had to do something. I didn't want to waste the cops' time, but now looking back at it, I absolutely should have called them. I made the stupid decision to open my door and ask what she wanted. I asked why she was here and why she couldn't just leave me alone. Her tone changed once again to soft-spoken, and she was asking for her sweater back. I yelled at her and told her she can't just be at my window at 2 in the morning asking for a sweater, and then I said if she didn't leave my property, I'd be calling the cops. At this point, she blew up screaming at me while starting to sob uncontrollably. For a moment, I actually felt bad, but then my heart dropped as I saw something that still sends shivers down my spine to this day. She wasn't alone. To the left of her was a thick tree in our front yard, and peeking out from it was a hooded figure. She saw me move to focus to the tree, and she knew I saw them. She reached for my arm and grabbed me, and as she did this, I saw the person run out from behind the tree, but I couldn't make out any facial features. It didn't matter, because they were sprinting toward my window. In that moment, my fight or flight kicked in, and I slammed my window shut on Greg's arm. She screamed out in pain and pulled it back. I slammed it shut and locked it just before the other person reached my window. My heart was racing, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I showed them my phone dialing 911, and at that, they hurried back to her car, started it, and drove away. I was in total shock, not even comprehending what had just happened. They sent an officer to my house. He took down my story and told me they'd call if anything came of it. Of course, there wasn't much they could do, as there was no evidence anything happens, like most 911 calls. As far as I know, she never had any legal action taken against her. As for what they wanted with me, she's also gotten people jumped and robbed before, so I wouldn't doubt they wanted to do that, or possibly worse. I'm just extremely lucky that the person hiding behind the tree decided to peek out. My name is Amy, and I haven't really slept much since last Tuesday. Not because I can't, but because I don't feel safe closing my eyes anymore. That's what happens, I guess, when someone you thought you knew turns out to be capable of something you only expect from horror movies. I broke up with my boyfriend Tommy 3 weeks ago. It wasn't dramatic, at least not at first. We'd been dating for just under a year. In the beginning, he was sweet. He was overly attentive and always texting and calling like any partner wants. At first, it felt like real love, the kind you think you're lucky to have. But over time, it turned possessive. He'd get upset if I took too long to reply. He'd ask weird questions like who I'd smiled at that day or if I had seen any guys looking at me. Sometimes he'd show up at my job unannounced, just standing outside the window like he was checking in. He even showed up to the bars I was at with friends if I was having a girls' night out, and then forced me to come home with him. My friends started to hate him for these exact reasons. He never trusted me, but I didn't end it until he started asking if I'd ever consider putting a tracker on my phone to keep each other safe. Not to start sharing each other's locations, but to literally put a tracker on my phone. That was the last straw for me. I told him it was over, and in response, he cried at first, but then he went silent. I remember hanging up on our last call with this strange tightness in my chest, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. For a little while, things were quiet. I blocked his number and tried to move on. I started going back to the gym, cooking real meals, just trying to feel normal again. But about a week after the breakup, I started getting strange messages. Not from Tommy, or at least not directly, but from random numbers with no name or context. They were short, usually just a vague single sentence. I didn't reply to any of them. That's a surefire way to get a spam number to know to keep harassing you. I just blocked each number as it came. I did not tell my friends. I told myself it was probably a scam or some spam bot because I've always gotten spam texts. But then, things moved beyond just random texts. One night, I was in bed and had to get up to pee. I went into the hallway outside my bedroom, and before entering the bathroom, I thought I heard a soft noise come from downstairs in the foyer. I'm not the type to go check on a noise. I get scared in the dark, hence why I always like being in a relationship so I don't have to stay alone all the time. I didn't go down to check it. I convinced myself it was a radiator clicking or something. I've lived in this apartment for almost 2 years, and most of that time was spent living with my ex George and then Tommy the remainder of that time, but hardly ever alone. I know the sounds it makes, and honestly, that sound was not one I'd heard before. So after I went to the bathroom, I went straight back into my room and jumped into bed, thinking the thin sheet of blanket cloth would protect me. Another night, around 2 a.m., I could have sworn I heard a door in my apartment open from outside my room. That was the sound that woke me up, so I wasn't 100% sure of it. It could have been part of my dream, maybe. Still, my heart was racing. I texted my family group chat with my siblings and my parents, just saying, I keep hearing noises every night, I'm getting scared. Of course, they were all asleep though, so I went back to sleep. That weekend, I came home from visiting my sister and immediately felt like something was off. Nothing was missing or broken, but I felt like maybe doors were left open at angles that they weren't left before. It may sound far-fetched, but it's not. I have a habit of leaving doors closed or near closed when I leave my apartment. All the doors were basically fully open in the entire apartment. There was no draft at all. I keep the air conditioning on most of the time. I walked through the apartment slowly, checking each room. My stomach dropped when I saw that the hallway closet was slightly open. Now I knew something was wrong. I always leave that closet door closed. There's no reason to leave it open, and plus, the door tends to swing out if I do leave it open. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute before I approached. When I pulled it fully open, nothing was there. Just coats and shoes, same as usual. That night, I pushed a chair under my bedroom door and slept with a knife under my pillow. I kept the bedside lamp on. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to the sound of something moving, just a soft shuffle. I sat up slightly, confused, and then I realized the light was now off and the room was dark. I looked toward the door. I could see it was open, but I had wedged a chair under it. How could it be wide open? At first, I thought maybe I dreamed wedging the chair and leaving on the light, or maybe I'd gotten up in my sleep, but I quickly found out how wrong I was. I saw something at the foot of my bed in the dark. I swear I couldn't tell what it was. It was just some black mass in the dark. But when I finally started realizing that what I was looking at was the top half of someone's head, it was too late, because I felt two hands start caressing my feet, and I completely lost it. I screamed so loud until I had no air left in my lungs, and I instantly recognized Tommy's voice telling me to calm down. But when I kept screaming, he got on top of me and put his hand over my mouth. He told me he wasn't there to hurt me, just to talk. He said he wouldn't let go of my mouth until I agreed to be quiet, so I nodded. The first thing I asked him was how he got into my apartment, and he said he made a copy of my key when we were together just in case there was ever an emergency. He never told me he did this. Straight psychopath behavior. He must have snuck out overnight one night with my keys to do it somewhere. As I sat there listening to him, I debated pulling the knife, but I was too scared to do so. I knew if I did that, I had to actually be ready to use it. He kept saying over and over how he wasn't there to hurt me, just to talk, but it seems like he was simply there to scare me into agreeing to get back with him, and I truly was too scared to say no in fear of what he might do. So I said yes, but I asked him to simply leave for the night because I was shook. I think he was there in my bed for half an hour total before he left, and when he was gone, the first thing I did was call the police and explain the break-in. I said I was scared that he was still on the premises so that the police would actually come. When they did, I made an official police report, which I later used to file a restraining order against Tommy, with enough people backing up my claims, since I couldn't actually prove he broke into my house. A detective later traced the fake numbers back to his cell phone through some fake phone number app, which was also helpful in getting the restraining order. I stayed with my parents until I was able to get a new apartment. My advice to all women out there is the first sign of any sort of mental illness in the man you're with, you should really consider getting away as soon as possible just to be safe. I still have to live with the trauma of waking up to him in my room, and I had to actually consider pulling a knife on him. I dated Marissa for a year and a half. At first, she was one of the most intense people I'd ever met. Not in a bad way. She was passionate, charismatic, and could talk about anything for hours. When she left, it was like she pulled you into her world. The first few months were incredible. She'd surprise me with gifts, leave sticky notes with poems on my mirror, text me goodnight every single night without fail, but that intensity had a darker side. She didn't do calm or wait and see. Everything was either perfect or catastrophic. If I was 5 minutes late responding to a text, she'd send a stream of messages, first worried, then angry, and then apologizing. It got worse slowly, almost invisibly. She once accused me of cheating because I liked an Instagram post from a girl I hadn't spoken to since high school. And when I told her that something she did made me uncomfortable, she would shut down completely. I don't mean just get quiet. I mean she would sit in my apartment for hours staring at the wall, just refusing to leave until I told her everything was fine. The first time she showed up at my office unannounced was 6 months in. She brought coffee and acted like it was cute, like we were some TV couple. I laughed it off, but the second time was because I hadn't answered her call. She stayed parked outside in the lot until I came down. She'd been crying. I told her it wasn't okay, and she just smiled and said, "You'd do the same for me, right?" I didn't have an answer for that. I kept making excuses for her. Trauma, abandonment issues, childhood stuff. I thought if I just proved I wasn't gonna leave, she'd calm down. Instead, the more I gave, the more she needed. Eventually, I reached my limit. I told her it had to end. She didn't yell or cry, she just stared at me in silence for what felt like minutes. Then she nodded and said, "You think it's over for you, but it's not over for me." I remember how cold that made me feel, like it wasn't even a threat, just a fact. I blocked her on everything that same night, and I changed my number. I even asked my building manager if I could get a different unit. For a few weeks, I thought it worked. Then the letters started showing up. The letters had no stamps or return addresses, just my name handwritten on the envelope, usually left between my door and the frame. I held on to some of these notes. The first one was kind of nostalgic. It said, "I miss waking up to you. I still sleep on the side of the bed where you used to lay." The second one got stranger. It said, "You always check the door 3 times before you go to bed. You probably don't even notice it, but I do." The third letter was the one that made me pack a suitcase. It said, "You wore your blue hoodie Monday, the one with the hole in the sleeve. You should sew that up before it gets worse." That was the same hoodie I wore when I went to pick up groceries that day at a store across town in the pouring rain. I hadn't seen anyone, not a single person I recognized, but she had seen me. I knew then that moving across the city wouldn't be enough. I found a job in Denver, a good one. I didn't tell anyone except my brother and immediate family. I left no forwarding address. I even created a new email for the job, and I didn't link any personal info. I went completely dark. I even got a P.O. box under a false name. I thought that would be enough, and for a while it was. Many months passed, and I slept soundly. I started dating again, nothing serious, just drinks and movies. But I was laughing again. I felt like a person. Then, one Saturday, I opened my P.O. box and found an envelope. Just my name again, no stamp or return address. Inside was a Polaroid. It was of me walking in my apartment building, taken from behind. My earbuds were in, and I had a coffee in one hand. It was cold out. You could see snow on the sidewalk and the mountains in the background. I checked the back, and written in red ink, it said, "Your shoulders slouch when you're tired." I didn't wait. I moved again, faster this time. I paid cash for a rental in a different part of town. Smaller building and fewer tenants. I switched jobs once again and told my boss I had family stuff and had to go fully remote. I got a rescue dog who was big and loud, a big German Shepherd mix to try and keep me sane. I deleted mostly everything online. I had no apps or social media. I went gray for almost a year and heard nothing. No letters or pictures anymore. I let myself believe she was finally gone. Until the post-it note. It was stuck to my front door one evening when I got home from walking the dog. It was a yellow note with red ink, and it said, "I don't like the beard." My stomach actually dropped. I'd grown it out maybe 3 months prior. Nobody had seen me with it except the dog and maybe my work webcam, which I kept taped over unless on a call. I shaved it off that night. I told myself it was a coincidence, but the next morning, another note was waiting. Tucked under the windshield wiper of my car, it said, "Better." I contacted the police again and filed a report. They said without threats or property damage, there wasn't anything they could do. I asked if I could file a restraining order, and they said I'd need to prove she'd been near me, which, without seeing her or catching her in the act, was nearly impossible. I changed my habits and started paying attention to every detail, like locking the doors and drawing the blinds. I didn't sleep much. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the floorboards to creak. 2 weeks passed with no incident. I started to wonder if maybe the notes were old. Maybe she'd left them a while ago and I'd only just noticed. But deep down, I didn't even believe that. Then one night, I woke up in the middle of the night with this horrible feeling, like someone had just been watching me, and they only just stepped out of the room. I got up and checked the doors and windows, even under the bed like I was a kid again. Nothing was out of place. But the next morning, taped to the outside of my front door, was a small envelope like someone had taken their time to align it perfectly. Inside was a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was Marissa and I in a boardwalk photo booth from back when we were still together. We were smiling and her head was on my shoulder, but her eyes had been stretched out in deep gouges like someone had used a needle or a pin. I moved again, not across town this time, but out of the city completely. I found a small cabin 3 hours into the mountains. It was isolated and surrounded by pine trees with only one road in. I paid in cash and used a fake name on the lease, which was a month-to-month payment system, and I left my old smartphone behind, getting a second phone number in the process. I bought a burner phone for emergencies mainly. I worked remote through a company-issued laptop that only connected through a secure VPN. No one besides my immediate family and my best friend knew where I was. I kept to myself. The only quote-unquote visitor I got was my Uber Eats driver delivering occasional groceries. For a whole month, I barely even went into town, and it all finally worked, until I heard footsteps outside crunching the snow. My dog went ballistic. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were shoe marks, and they went from window to window. There were no notes or anything left anywhere on the house, though. What else was I to assume other than it was her? That she found me again? Even though I still don't know for certain if that was actually her that time, I spent that entire day packing my things and driving back to my hometown. Today, I'm living in a house with 3 roommates who are in the military. If that's not a house that people know not to mess with, I don't know what is. Their pickup trucks, purple heart plates, and giant flags all over the front of the house are absolutely deterrent to Marissa playing whatever psychopathic game she was playing. She's a mentally unstable stalker, it's clear as day, and she's a danger to herself, me, and whoever she gets involved with in the future. I just wish law enforcement was more willing to step in and do something before something really bad happens. In June of 2019, an ad was posted on Craigslist for a room available for rent in a single-family home in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. The ad wasn't for a whole house rental, rather the man who posted the ad was looking to be roommates with somebody, meaning they would share the living space including the kitchen. This is what the ad said. 35-year-old male here, looking to rent out one of the empty bedrooms in my 4-bedroom, 1-family house. It's just me living here currently, and I'm looking for a roommate. The other 2 bedrooms are currently being used as storage, but depending on how much space you need, I could consider allowing you to use one of the extra spare bedrooms as storage as well. The ad then goes on to list all the features inside the house and included maintenance. It even goes on to note in all capitals that no pets or smokers were allowed, which could lead someone to believe the person behind this listing is a clean, halfway trustworthy person. A few days after this ad was posted, a regular 25-year-old named James came across the listing. Desperate for a place of his own and to move out of his parents' house, and for $900 a month, he thought it could be a good deal depending on the homeowner, of course. James contacted the owner through the number provided on the ad, and they had a 5-minute phone call setting up a time and day for James to view the house. On a Tuesday after work, James stopped by the house, which was exactly how it looked in the ad. The owner was waiting on the front stoop. He introduced himself as Todd. He was at least 40 years old. Todd gave James a walk around the house like you would do if you were viewing any apartment or house for the first time. The house was a modest size, nothing fancy or anything, but pretty clean, and for the price it was spacious enough. James noted that there were no wood floors, it was all carpet, even in the living room and bedrooms. After the showing, Todd discussed with James the ground rules, which mostly were normal, but one that stood out to James was the rule of having a sleep time by 12 during the week. Since James works full-time, he didn't see this as much of an inconvenience, just a rather unusual rule to have in a roommate situation. But he chalked it up to Todd also working a 9 to 5 and not wanting to be woken up by noises late at night. A week later, James moved in, which given that the bedroom was already furnished, it was an easy, quick process. Todd would be in the living room most of the time, watching TV or just reading the paper. He didn't seem to go out much. He would try to talk to James anytime he were in the kitchen making food, which got a little old pretty fast according to James, who says he would often just want to eat in peace but never had that luxury. On one work night, James woke up thirsty, so he went to fill up a cup with water down in the kitchen, when he noticed red stains on the carpet leading to the basement. He quietly opened the basement door and found that the red stains led down the carpeted stairs, but that Todd's voice came from the kitchen, which was lit up by a small nightlight, and Todd was sitting in one of the kitchen chairs. He said in a raspy voice, "Don't go down there right now." Todd said the stains on the carpet were wine stains. James didn't ask questions. He just filled his cup with water and went back upstairs. From this moment onward, James wasn't 100% comfortable in the house, and was now suspicious of his landlord/roommate. One day after work, Todd wasn't home, so James decided to take a look in his bedroom. The door was locked, but was easily unlocked with his fingernail. Inside, James immediately found 2 of his shirts, and strangely his Under Armour water bottle and a basket of clothes. James took his 3 belongings and left the room, then relocked the door with his fingernail. He planned on taking a personal day from work and evacuating the place early the next day without mentioning anything. After all, there was no lease or security deposit, so he could leave pretty easily. He did some packing that night and had a hard time sleeping because his mind was racing. His door creaked open at some time past midnight. Since he was laying on his back, he simply opened his eyes to see Todd, standing at the doorway, the dim light from the hallway nightlight illuminating his face and body in an unsettling way. Possibly not even aware if James was awake or not, Todd said into the room, "I know you went into my room. I told you my room is off limits. From now on, I also don't want you going in the basement. If this happens again, there's going to be a big problem." He then angrily slammed the door, and James heard him stomping back down the hallway to his bedroom, where he then slammed that door as well. James says that Todd sounded drunk when he was saying this, as he was slurring his words and his voice was raspier than usual. James started packing the rest of his things, and left first thing in the morning. He blocked Todd's phone number and temporarily moved back into his parents' house. A couple days later, he received a voicemail from some random number that sounded kind of garbled, but a breathing into the phone could be heard. This was what it sounded like. James says he's confident that the stains in the carpets weren't wine, they looked more like blood stains. Whether this Todd guy was hiding something or not will remain a mystery. This next ad was a lot more sinister and dark on the surface. On March 9th, 2001, in the early days of the internet, there existed a forum called Cannibal Cafe, a defunct forum for people with a cannibalism fetish. This is where Armin Maiwas posted his gruesome barbaric request that looked like this. It was titled "Wanted a Battle Boy. Are you between 18 and 25 years old, normal and healthy? Is it your desire to put an end to your life? But if you want something more sensible, then come to me. I'll slaughter you and use your body in delicious steaks and schnitzel. Interested? Then please apply with indication of age, height, and weight, and preferably with a photo." It was signed Frankie, a fake name that Armin was using. This may remind some of you about a similar Craigslist ad that I included in a video years ago, asking for volunteers to basically donate their bodies for cannibalistic desires. The only difference is that it's a known fact that this ad had a victim, 43-year-old Bernd Brandes. Brandes stumbled across the ad and reached out to Armin, and they later met at his house. Armin was caught weeks after he and Brandes had met, after putting out an advertisement for a second victim, which was reported by an Austrian student. Armin was arrested. He confessed to being a cannibal and having chopped Brandes up and eaten him. He said it was something he had wanted to do for a long time. He said to the court on the first day of his trial for murder, "I always had the fantasy, and in the end I fulfilled it." When this went public, everybody who knew Armin was shocked, as he was known as a very polite and likable man. To the family next door, he seemed to be the perfect neighbor. He mowed their lawn, repaired their car, and even invited them around for dinner. Armin had a unique defense in his trial, that his victim actually agreed to be killed and eaten. Though this defense didn't work very well, as he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Bernd Brandes.
Mein Name ist Armin Maiwas. Ich habe einen Mann auf dessen Wunsch hin getötet, geschlachtet und gegessen.
However, to the dismay and shock of many, Armin is allowed out of prison to go on walks. He's given sunglasses and a cap so that he isn't recognized, and he's taken to towns in different federal states for security reasons, where he walks freely with 2 officers accompanying him from behind. Not so shockingly for this third and last one, we're going back to Craigslist. This was the ad posted to the child care section in Millersburg, Ohio in July of 2021. It read as follows. Titled "Infant Care Available, Millersburg Area." The body read, "Responsible child care provider available." with 7+ years of experience caring for infants/toddler age children. I'm currently not providing care in my own home. I will come to your home. I do not run a daycare. I'm looking for 2 children max that I can provide one-on-one care for. Children must be between the ages of 5 and 9 years old. I do not deal with babies or young toddlers. Flexible schedule available. Weekends and overnights can be arranged. For more information, please contact me. There was a photo of a woman attached that was presumed to be the alleged babysitter. The person who sent this to me didn't want to be named. However, she is a single mother of 2 kids, and she was looking for an affordable, trustworthy babysitter. She found this ad on Craigslist and contacted the person who posted the ad by email since there was no phone number listed. She stated in her original email that she was looking for somebody to watch her 8-year-old twins during the weeknights while she was at work. The person emailed back swiftly, stating she was interested in working for her. The mother wanted to first meet the babysitter beforehand, of course, so she asked for her phone number. She texted the number that was given to her, but after the mother gave the sitter her address, they stopped answering, and it wasn't until later that night that the mother got a text back saying, "Thanks for the address, I'll see you soon," with a winky face. Instantly, the mother tried calling and texting the person, asking what they meant, and then she quickly became defensive when they didn't answer, saying she was calling the police. She then proceeded to block the number and went to the police station. The police weren't of much help though, stating the text wasn't directly a threat, and that she did in fact provide her address for the purpose of meeting. Plus, regardless of what people say, depending on the severity of the situation, the police are rarely willing to just put in the time and resources of tracking a person. The mother left the station feeling as though she had wasted her time. It wasn't until a week later that she woke up to 4 missed calls from a random number with an unfamiliar area code, along with texts that said the following: "I didn't mean to scare you. I really want to watch your kids. Please answer my texts. I'm gonna pay a visit later. Please answer." Not knowing what to do and not feeling confident in going back to the police, she texted back, "I'm not interested, thank you. Please leave me alone." She went ahead and blocked this number too. The mother had the kids sleep in her room that night just to be safe. Around 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. The mother knew it was undoubtedly the person behind that ad who had been harassing her. She quickly rushed to turn off her bedroom light, but apparently by that point it was too late. There was a knocking at the window, and a muffled woman's voice on the other side yelling in to open the window. The mother started to cry, "Leave us alone," and her fear was rubbing off on her children, who they themselves started to get scared and cry. The woman at the window started to shout and bang on the window, cursing and yelling until she threw a stone through the glass, causing it to shatter. The woman then disappeared from the window to never be seen again. The mother immediately called the police this time, getting an official police report with evidence of the harassment. The detective came to the mother's house the next day and assured her he would be on the case, using whatever resources the police department had to trace the woman. After giving the phone numbers and link to the removed Craigslist ad, the detective left. And over a month later now, her case is still open, and she has received little updates on it. In 7th grade, we took an end-of-the-year field trip to an aquarium near school. It was called Ripley's Aquarium of the Smokies. We live in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, a literal mountain town, with nothing but hills and mountains as far as the eyes can see. Our science teacher, Mr. Russo, was our chaperone for the trip. He was a very lax teacher, so while other teacher chaperones were more uptight and strict with their groups, Mr. Russo was more chill about his job. That may seem like a good thing, but because of his lackadaisical approach at supervising, my friend Aiden and I were able to easily bail from the aquarium lobby away from the rest of the groups. We quite simply didn't want to wait so long for all the groups to move. The whole aquarium was empty, except for our classes, so when Aiden and I walked through the passageways, or I guess observation areas as you would say. Before everyone else, we didn't see anyone else. We got the best views at all the big fish tanks and habitats. We moved on to the next dark room, all of which were lit up with a dark blue tint from the fish tanks, by the way. This room had a lot of big tanks with tropical fish. We were making jokes about finding Nemo fish like clownfish and the dory fish, and that's when I remember someone calling "hey" to us in a very assertive, commanding voice. It was some guy in cargo shorts and a green t-shirt. He asked us if we were with the field trip. I was about to shake my head no, but Aiden said yes. The man told us to come with him right now. We both assumed he worked for the aquarium, so we followed. He wasn't leading us back to the lobby though. He was leading us through some narrow, dark hallways. I remember passing the bathrooms and a few exit signs hanging on the ceiling before reaching an exit door. He led us outside to some back area, I guess by the woods. I finally asked if he worked there and where he was leading us. He said yes, he did work there, and that he had to drive us back around to the front of the aquarium in order to be let back in. It made just as much sense back then as it does now. But we were two nervous 7th graders who thought we were about to get in serious trouble. So when he led us to his car, we willingly got in the back seats. He told us to strap in, and he pulled out from the back parking lot and onto the street. Just as we thought he was going to make a right turn towards the front, he turned left. Right away, both Aiden and I asked him where he was going at the same time. He didn't answer that question, but about 5 seconds later, we heard the locks to the back doors click down, and he made some kind of threat along the lines of, "If either of you try to make any moves, I'll kill you." He then proceeded to slide out what appeared to be a big knife in his glove box as some kind of threat. Aiden and I sat in silence. I'm sure he wanted to throw up just like I wanted to. We had to think of a way to escape, but we couldn't talk to each other because the man kept looking in the rearview mirror every other second. He was driving us uphill through some woodsy, isolated neighborhood until he finally pulled over onto the side of the road in what appeared to be the middle of nowhere. No houses, no through traffic. He told us to stay in the car as he got out, with his knife in his hand. I whispered to Aiden to be prepared to run as soon as I said to. The man came to my door, popped it open, and told me to step out. He told me to tell my friend that if he wants me alive, he better be in the car by the time we got back. I felt a deepening feeling in my stomach when I heard that. The man started walking me to the woods with the knife probably in his pocket, to do God knows what. I saw Aiden sliding over to my side of the car, which had an unlocked door, and when he seemed ready to run, I screamed "run." Aiden was off already, running downhill. I easily dodged the man as I fled past him, following Aiden. The man tried chasing us on foot, and I'm not even kidding when I say he threw the knife at me. He missed with only maybe a few inches to spare. I heard the clanging of the knife hitting the ground ahead of me. I didn't stop to pick it up. I just kept running downhill in the direction we came. The man stopped following after throwing the knife. I think he got back in his car and fled the scene. We somehow managed to make it back to the aquarium in under an hour, and we also managed to sneak back into the group. Mr. Russo didn't even notice. Aiden and I decided to keep quiet about what just happened. What purpose would it serve getting ourselves in trouble, given that there was relatively no chance of that man getting caught? As we got older, we started to wonder more and more what the intentions of that man were. We could obviously think of a few likely ones, but either way, we kept quiet about it and don't really like to think about it. When I was in 8th grade, all of my classmates and I looked forward to our Washington, D.C. field trip. The thrill of going on any sort of trip with your friends was enough to excite us. After all preparations, we were ready for D.C. Once we arrived to our destination, my class of around 100 students were partitioned off into 3 groups, and within these groups were our 3 other hotel mates. Each group was sent off in different coach buses, and we would be taken to different attractions throughout DC, neighboring states, monuments, parks, food stops, museums, and more. After a long weekend of visiting educational sites, our teachers decided to treat us to a colonial ghost tour one night. It was an evening walking tour through some of America's historical sites near village cemeteries and old townhomes. I don't remember exactly which city we were in, but I remember the guides telling us that many of the empty homes were preserved due to their historical significance. I've always been scared of most things related to ghosts and such, but I was positive that nothing would happen in our ghost tour. We split off into smaller groups of around 10 members each, and were instructed to carry around a camera if we wished. The guide kept telling us not to expect much from the tour, that there would most likely be nothing supernatural during the course of the evening. As we wandered from colonial home to cemetery plot to colonial home, I just took interest in the histories that the guides would share of each home. They would indulge us in the stories of each homeowner, while my friends would snap away at photos, hoping to find a shiny orb. One of my friends, Jessica, that I was sharing a room with during that trip, was not one of the kids that were constantly taking pictures. She would take a photograph every once in a while, but spent most of the time listening. My group reached a small 2-story home in the middle of the street. The house had an ominous blue hue to the windows, but the house was vacant. I remember being very curious about this home. The tour guide began to tell us a little bit about the house. She had mentioned that the home had originally belonged to a man and his beautiful wife. He adored his wife, and the couple was thrilled to receive news that they would be expecting a child. Unfortunately, the wife had died after giving birth to a baby girl. The man was absolutely devastated and grew to resent his homely daughter. During her childhood, he kept her in the house as much as he could. He reminded her about how homely she looked and could not find her a suitor. Feeling that she had no other purpose, he had his daughter learn how to sew and weave upstairs, using her only good attribute, her hands. After hearing this story, I remember the sorrow that I felt for this girl. She and her father must have lived unhappily in that house until their deaths. My friend Jessica took a photograph of the house, and we both moved on to the next house. I kept walking until Jessica stopped and became silent, looking down in her digital camera screen. I walked over and scanned the photograph. I saw a gleam coming from the edge of the second-floor window on the right. I had her zoom on the scene. After zooming in, you could clearly see 3 figures staring out from the window. On the way right was the translucent outline of a woman. A taller man was standing behind her to the side. Even more curiously, there was a third figure. It appeared to be a woman, but she was harder to make out. The body was there for sure, but her skin was not as clear. Jessica and I freaked out. The first woman and man made sense to me. That would explain the man and his daughter. But who was this third dark woman off the side? I raised my hand and had to ask the guide, was there ever another person that lived with this family at the house we just looked at? The guide looked surprised at my question and answered, yeah, during the time of their residence, they had a black female servant living with them. Senior year of high school. My forensics teacher, Mr. Stevenson, somehow convinced the school to let him take us on a field trip to some abandoned building in the woods that was the site of a major crime scene. I think he might have finessed it a bit and made the school think we'd just be studying the perimeter and outside of the building, but we did much more than that. Mainly, it used to be a drug den. When we got there, I realized how frighteningly tall the building actually was, and its location was just surreal, surrounded by forest in every direction, and the only road that leads up to it is a road you would never think to drive down just because of the grass growing in the street. Since our current topic at the time of our class was dealing with drugs, Mr. Stevenson led us into the abandoned building. He gave a tour of the place as if he'd been there many times before, and he seemed to know quite a bit of history about the building. For example, that the actual original purpose of the building was unknown. Apparently, construction on the higher levels wasn't even finished before the building was abandoned. Its location and size made it ideal for drug deals and other illegal activity to take place, which surprised all of us since there we were, inside of this apparent former drug den for a school field trip. Mr. Stevenson was so laxed about this trip that he didn't even notice when a couple students wandered off to explore on their own. Or maybe he just didn't care. Given that a few other students did it, Me and my friend Gianna, or G, decided to go off on our own too. And yes, I'm a guy. I just so happened to have a really close friend that was a girl back in high school. There had to be at least 8 floors in this building, but we saw from the outside the top few floors looked unfinished. I basically forced G to come all the way upstairs with me to the top few floors. Worst came to worst, we wouldn't be able to find the group again, and we just returned to the bus right outside. We climbed the stairs, one flight after another. It was weird. As we reached the middle floors, the amount of debris and graffiti lessened a bit, but then as we got to the higher floors, there was even more graffiti and litter than the lower floors. Then things got sketchy. It seemed we were on the second highest floor, and everything on this floor was still just wood foundation. A lot of it seemed to be rotting, and there were a lot of holes up there. We would have gone up to the last floor, but the stairs had been completely stripped and broken. Basically, there were no stairs to the last floor. There had to be a way up there, though. So we watched our step for weak wood as we navigated the floor. Then, Gianna grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. She pointed up at a hole in the ceiling and said she saw something. Then there was a ticking noise, like the kind of ticking noise a person makes when they're calling their cat or something. Followed by that, someone's arm came into view from the hole above us. Just their arm, though. And judging by the position of the arm, whoever's arm it was must have been laying down flat on the floor beside the hole. They had a long black sleeve on, so the only skin that was visible was their hand. G was scared. I laughed a little at first, but I'm not going to say it wasn't slightly unnerving. Gianna started telling me let's go back down. I started calling up to the person, how do we get up there? They didn't answer. Instead, they just kept making the ticking noise and waving us up. That's when things started getting really creepy, and I agreed with G that we should go back down. Right after I said this, the person pulled their arm out from the hole, and we heard the sound of a shoe quickly scrape the wood foundation above us as the person was clearly getting up. We couldn't see, though. I nudged Gianna to move. I was creeped out and just wanted to get back down. As we were about to leave the main open layout room and back into the stairway corridor, there was a crash far behind us. We turned and saw a man on the complete opposite side of the room, facing the wall. It seemed he just jumped through one of the holes. He then quickly turned his head to look at us, without moving his body. There was something about his face and clothing. He didn't look like the typical urban exploration type. He looked dangerous and unstable. G and I ran for it now, down one flight of stairs at a time. 3 flights down, I looked up the long corridor above us and saw the man at top looking down at me. I yelled go to Gianna. We kept going down. Like 5 flights later, I looked up again, and there was the man again, looking down at me. This time he seemed much closer, and I just realized he'd been chasing us. We got to the bottom, and I looked up one more time, and I didn't see him this time. We heard the voice of Mr. Stevenson nearby, and I kind of started to laugh about what just happened. Not exactly because I found it funny, but because I was just happy that we made it back safely. G was not laughing, though. She was genuinely disturbed. We found Mr. Stevenson, who asked where we were, and we told the truth about what just happened. He was pretty mad at us, but given what we just told him, he also advised we should leave the building. The other kids who wandered off had returned, and when we got to the bus, Mr. Stevenson did a head count like 3 times. Overall, the trip wasn't a failure for the rest. The other kids did learn things about the building and drugs, but for my friend Gianna and I, really, it was the most horrific thing we ever went through. One day like any other, I was sitting in my room doing whatever when I got a notification from Instagram that I got a new follower. It seemed to be one of those random spam-like accounts. The username was Ty13053, and there were 5 pictures on the profile, all of different typical suburban houses. The profile had 2 followers, was following 3 people including me, and none of the pictures had any likes. Comments seemed to be disabled on all of the pictures. I didn't bother blocking or removing the account from my followers, as I had my profile set to public anyway at the time. A couple nights later, I got a notification that the random Ty13053 account liked my most recent picture. Just being curious, I click on the notification and then pull up the profile again. This time there was a new picture on the profile, and I instantly recognized it as a picture of my house. I DM'd the profile asking who it was, saying it was very funny. Of course, it had to be one of my friends messing with me. When the person running the account left my DMs unseen and didn't reply, I followed up with, "This is harassment and a threat," and that I would have the police follow up on this. I ran to my parents' room to wake them up, as it was past 12 at that point. I showed them the picture of our house, and said someone was messing with me who knew where we lived. They tried to rationalize and said the same thing I thought, that it was someone from my school messing with me. My dad and I both went outside regardless to have a look around the property and on the street. It was a ghost town out there though, as it should be past 12 o'clock. We went back inside into our respective bedrooms. I wasn't actually going to pursue it with the police at that exact moment. It was obvious to me, at least in the moment, that someone who knew me was pranking me. I stayed up for a few more hours, and around the time I was about to go to bed, I got a DM from the account. It was an image, another image of my house. It was on the side this time. As I had the chat opened, he sent another, this time a picture of my window, with the glare from the TV in my room visible in the picture. I didn't dare get up and look out the window. Wouldn't you guess it, the next DM from the account was, "Look out your window." I turned off the TV to allow total darkness in the room. I didn't want to be seen by whoever was at my window. I quietly crawled off my bed onto the floor in the dark. As I was crawling on the carpet towards the door, a pounding on the window started. I don't want to say knocking, because these bangs on the glass sounded loud enough to shatter it. Inevitably, I turned, and of course, saw a person at the window. Facial features, though, impossible to make out. I got up and ran out of my room and to my parents' room once again. I pulled my dad out of the bed and led him to my room. He heard the end of the bangs on my window, but by the time we got to my room, the guy at the window was gone. The banging was all my dad needed to believe me and take this seriously, though. We called the cops that second and talked to the officers who came. They said the good news was since the person was contacting me through Instagram, they could track the person after putting a legal request into Instagram. So that same night, we followed the cop car to the nearest precinct, where we went through this long process. They took the account name and my details of the story, and literally the next day, we found out who it was. It was this kid named Luke who went to my high school. As much as I want to give the last name, that could lead to issues. Luke was a very, very weird kid that didn't talk to many people. He was just a very mean, unpleasant, and scary dude. Not scary like tough, scary like some would even fear he'd do something crazy that would harm students or staff. I don't know why he targeted me. I never even spoke to the kid. But this really proved how dangerous he was. He hit my window so hard we found small cracks on it in the daylight. He was arrested and we got him for a harassment charge, an attempted breaking and entering charge, and I think a couple others. One day in calculus class, my friend Joe and I were goofing off in the corner when someone on Instagram requested to follow me. It was some blonde girl named Tracy. I accepted her follow request and showed Joe, because based on her picture, she was pretty hot. Of course, I felt pretty good having what I assumed to be some random good-looking girl following me. I requested to follow her back, and then I put my phone down to take notes in class. It wasn't until I got home that I got a DM from the girl. I don't really want to relay our whole conversation. I'll just tell you it started with her calling me very attractive. asking some basic questions about me, etc. I told her to accept my follow request, but she said she didn't want her boyfriend to see any new followers because he checks that all the time. That's when it got exciting for me, having a girl show interest in me while she has a boyfriend. It might have been wrong of me, but I kept entertaining it. She said they kept fighting and she just needed a short break from hanging with him, that she wanted to hang out with someone else to detox. I texted my friend Joe asking his advice, and he said I should 100% go meet up with her. Just needed that justification from a buddy, of course. We made plans to meet up by the little Bayside beach in town at 11 p.m. The Bayside beach in town was the go-to spot for my friend group to hang out or just bring girls on little dates. I pulled up to the nearby parking lot around 10:50 and DM'd her that I was there 5 minutes later. She answered right away, saying, "Great, I left something in the sand for you." Odd. I said, "LOL, what?" She said, "Go look." It was bizarre that we were still DMing on Instagram at this point, but I went along with it. I walked over to the little quiet beach, and I saw something in the sand by the water. It was a little cardboard box. I went to open it, and it was a Polaroid picture of my car, parked in that little parking lot from just now. What the hell? I DM'd her, "LOL, where are you?" She replied, "Come find me." Okay, so she's messing with me or trying to be cute. I could tell based on the picture that she had taken it while hidden in the bush patch surrounding the perimeter of the parking lot. I referred to the picture to get the angle of where the picture was taken right. I walked up to that general area in front of the bushes and stopped. I heard this really weird sound, like the sound you would make if you were trying to gargle but with no water in your mouth. "Tracy?" I said. I parted the bush to try and expose her. Instead, I saw some man hunched over on the dirt below the bush, his back to me. His head shot back at me so suddenly that I fell backwards on my palms, landing on the concrete. I ran to my car and drove out from there. I had to tell Joe and the rest of my friends what happened, and while they still used that beach as a hangout spot, I had to stop going there for a while for my own good. I'm 17 years old. My name is Jackie. Like most girls, I envy the gorgeous ones on Instagram. I like getting lots of likes and comments on my pictures. So last summer, I was taking advantage of the beach weather and posting a lot of swimsuit photos. Those are always a hit and get lots of attention. I usually let anyone follow me, as I like seeing my follower count grow. One day in the summer, I got one strange follow request though. I clicked on the username. It was completely blank. No profile picture, no posts, no followers, nothing. In fact, I'd be the only account it would be following once I hit accept. But I didn't care. Maybe it was one of my crazy exes trying to stalk me. Let them look, I figured. A week later, it began, and I received my first comment from the strange account. The comment said "hot" on one of my week-old pictures. I didn't think much of it, being as more than half the time I received comments on photos, they were from people I didn't actually know in real life. The next day, though, the account went on a liking spree on my profile. He liked nearly half of all my pictures. Then things got worse. One night I got a call on my cell phone. Curiously, I picked up and heard in a deep voice, "Hey," on the other end. It was a guy's voice, very, very deep, and I didn't recognize the voice at all. The voice on the other end said, "This is Jackie, right?" I hung up the phone with my heart now racing. I shut the blinds on both my windows. I had no idea who it was, but I just hoped someone was playing a prank on me. The next day, the account tagged me in a picture. I looked to see what the picture was, and it was a picture of the street around my block. I blocked the account and stopped using Instagram for a few days. One day that week, my friend Jess and I went to the beach. When we parked and were unloading the trunk with our beach chairs, some guy in jeans and sunglasses came up to me and complimented my swimsuit. I thanked him while not wanting to talk to this guy at all. He asked Jess and I how our day was going, and that's when I recognized his voice. He was the one on the phone who called me. He found me, and he followed me. I told Jess to get back in the car, and we drove home making sure he wasn't following us. I explained to her on the way back what was going on. I didn't want to leave my car in the parking lot of the beach, scared that he would bug my car or something. I also had my dad check for any trackers on the car when we got home. I'm not sure how he found me, but I think he was wise to the fact that I knew it was him. However, just a few days ago, I received a DM on Instagram from some random account saying, "Remember that time we met at the beach?" I'm hoping the harassment doesn't start again. I haven't been sleeping these past few nights. I may have to contact the police.
This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out of her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move together since they'd only been dating for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like, "Roommate wanted, females only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most of the other places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she receives an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there's a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opens the door. At first, Amanda thinks that she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant was out and that he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. No furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keeping the lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walk down the hall into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Quote-unquote broken for sure. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to be polite. As she's given the guy her "thanks for the showing" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. He claims it's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, She told her mother and my brother everything. Cops were called. They took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. The house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier. It was found out that the house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room that the so-called landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was he had plastered ripped up pages from porno magazines on all the walls in the room. The really scary part of this was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine at about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except another pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape. I was up late looking for goalie equipment on Craigslist some night in the summer. I was only 14 and had no job and therefore no money, so I had to find the cheapest deal possible. I didn't really care about the condition of anything. I came across an ad that seemed like a steal. The pictures showed the pads, blocker, glove, and stick. They were all in visibly good condition. It was only listed for $50. That seemed like an insane deal. I contacted the seller via text and he asked me a few questions, one of which was how old I am. I responded 14 and he told me he's glad to hear that I'm dedicated at a young age. It didn't really seem weird to me what he said at the time, but now that I look back on it, I should have been wiser. I asked the seller for his address, but he instead asked me what town I'm from and that he could just meet me somewhere walking distance from my house. I didn't know how I felt about this, but I really wanted that equipment. We agreed to meet in the parking lot of the mall, which is literally down the block from my house. I stood alone in the exact spot I described for a few minutes, until I heard somebody toot their horn. I noticed a white van parked away from all the other cars, and then I received a text saying that he was in the white van. I replied telling him to come out with the equipment, but he said it would be easier to do the transaction in the van. I had a really bad feeling about this and hightailed away from there. I ran down the block, and when I looked back, I saw the white van driving down the street behind me. Now there was someone in the passenger side as well. I didn't want to lead them to my house, so I cut into some random person's backyard and hopped over the fence. I was on the opposite side of the block now, hiding behind a bush. Within 20 seconds, the white van passed by and turned the next turn, vanishing from sight. It was safe to run back to my house now. My parents flipped shit on me when I told them about it. I didn't get the tag number or a good look at their faces, so all they could report was a suspicious white van. The Craigslist ad was taken down, so I couldn't show it to my parents. I thought it was over, but that night, I heard a vehicle engine running outside. I looked out my window down to the street and saw the white van sitting across the street, but as soon as I looked out the window, the van drove off down the road out of sight. I haven't seen it since. I don't know if they saw me or not, or if they somehow found my address. It makes me paranoid to this day. I was selling a dining room set on Craigslist. I listed it for $1,200, but put slightly negotiable in the title. It was a good-looking set, but I wasn't getting any offers. I did live in the country though, so not a lot of people lived in my town. I finally received a call about the set. The man on the other end of the phone had a very shaky voice, and he sounded a bit off, but I can't really explain how. He wanted to check out the set to make an offer, so I gave him my address, and he said he would be over within the hour. I dusted off all the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. The doorbell rang within 10 minutes. I was shocked. He must have lived really close, which in my area was very surprising. I opened the door and immediately felt uncomfortable about letting this man into my house. He was wearing a white undershirt with yellow stains scattered all over it. His pants were way too baggy and had a few tears in them. His gray mustache stained brown in the middle and his hair a complete mess. Basically everything you shouldn't look in public, he looked. Basically everything you shouldn't look in public, he looked. He greeted me with a hello in the same shaky voice as before. I invited him in and he immediately caught a glimpse of the dining room set, since the dining room is the first room you see in the house. He began walking around really slowly, making weird sounds and making sure to feel every inch of every piece of furniture. I was very weirded out watching this and decided to break the silence by bringing up the price. I reminded him that my asking price was $1,200, and then he stopped, looked up at me, and gave me the most unnerving smile I had ever seen. "How about 500? He asked me. I laughed a bit at the insane offer, almost thinking he was joking, but when his smile turned to an angry expression, I knew he wasn't. I apologized and told him that's much too low for me. The lowest I would be willing to go is 1,000. The man then started acting even weirder. He put his hands up to his head and started making strange noises again, pacing back and forth. He then looked at me with a look of anger and hatred. This man was not right in the head. I realized it just then and there, and I needed him out of my house. I apologized to him again and thanked him for coming, which was the most obvious way of me letting him know it was time for him to leave. But he didn't move. At this point, the stare he was giving me was obviously a stare of malice. This man was much bigger than me, and I didn't think I could take him in a fight. But then the man moved his hand to his back pocket, and I quickly assumed he was reaching for a gun. I ran upstairs to my bedroom to my closet, leaving the man alone in the dining room. In my closet, I grabbed my .45, loaded it, and took cover behind the wall, sneaking a peek into the dining room. The man was gone. I went back to my room and locked the door. I called the police and took cover behind my bed in the meantime. It felt like hours before I heard the police sirens outside my house. However, I stayed put behind my bed. For all I knew, that man was right outside my bedroom door. Thankfully, I hadn't locked the door, and I heard the police enter my house. I left the bedroom with my hands raised and showed them my ID. They had me wait outside while they continued their search. I sat there for probably 5 minutes before the 2 police officers stepped out of my house, with the man in handcuffs. They told me something disturbing. He was hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. I feel it's only a miracle that the police weren't shot at, but the thing that still haunts me the most to this day was the look that man gave me through the window of the police car as it drove off. A look of malice and hatred, like the first thing he would plan to do after getting out of jail would be to come back for me. I'm still thinking about moving. I can't deal with the constant paranoia of that man coming back. All I can say that can be learned from this is to be very careful when giving your address to people from Craigslist.
It's unfortunately very easy for people to find your information online, and that includes your phone number, whether it's already on the internet public to everybody or available for purchase on websites like White Pages. If you're getting text from an unfamiliar number, it's usually safe to assume it's a scam or someone you might not want to be talking to. A 20-something-year-old girl from Los Angeles, who I'll refer to as Tina, was using an online dating app called OkCupid. She had matched with a guy named Richard, age 26, tall, black hair, average build. Tina says he looked pretty attractive in his pictures, which he had 4 of on his profile, which were all of him posing in different places. One with his dog, one in his car, one selfie, and one in front of a scenic waterfall. He lived only a couple miles away from Tina, and the two messaged back and forth for a while in the app, mingling over how long they've lived in the city for and where they've been to, etc. Eventually they exchanged numbers and started texting, with Richard quickly suggesting the two go on a date. Some of the text read as follows: "What are you up to tonight?" "Taking care of my dog and then relaxing. I'm exhausted." "Okay, I was gonna ask if you wanted to go on a date or something." "Not tonight. What about tomorrow though?" "Yeah, that works for me. We can go to the Stalking Horse. I think that's like right in the middle of both of us." "Yeah, that works." So the two agreed to a date the following night at a brewery that's not far from either of them. The conversation continues to go completely normal as the two are on their way to the bar. While Tina is on her way in an Uber, it appears that Richard may possibly be walking to the bar. He gets there before her and holds a spot at the bar for them. The text communication stops for a while once Tina lets him know that she's arrived, and so she goes inside to meet him and their date begins. They were in there for about an hour before Tina had to cut the date short due to being completely uncomfortable. She says from the first minute, she knew something about his vibe was off, that he just had a weird aura. She didn't like the way he looked at her, or his mannerisms, or his conversational skills. She found that he'd laugh at uncomfortable things and ask inappropriate questions, and even make weird faces, mostly with his eyes. Around the hour mark, she said she had to head home. Richard insisted he'd walk her home instead of having her Uber. Tina, at the time, says she was way too nice to people and often couldn't say no to things, so she reluctantly agreed to let him walk her home. It was a 20-minute walk, and the whole time she still felt the same unusual energy he'd given off inside the bar. She tried to be short with her answers to him. By the time they got to her apartment, he initiated a hug goodbye at the front of her driveway and she went inside. Not long after, she received this text. "Did I do something wrong? I got the vibe you were acting weird the way back. I was just trying to be nice." "Hey, no, you didn't do anything wrong. I just truthfully feel like we didn't really connect on a deeper level, and that's completely fine. But at this moment in my life, I'm just looking for that special connection with someone. I'm sorry, but I wish you the best. You were very nice." What? It was one date. Obviously, you won't feel a deeper connection immediately. That's what getting to know someone is. It takes multiple dates. "I'm sorry, I just don't think I'm interested." By this point, Richard gets very angry and aggressive, saying things like he wasted $100 on her and telling her to get back on her stupid dating apps. But then after Tina stops answering, Richard sends a very clear threat that he knows where she lives now. Tina sends one final response and then blocks Richard's number. She hoped that would be the end of it, but about 15 minutes after blocking his number, there was a manic pounding at the front door, and the angry screams of Richard were coming from the other side. Tina didn't give any kind of response. She hid in her bedroom until the bangs stopped. When she went to look through the peephole, she saw Richard standing by the side of her door, hiding from view. She called the police on him, and when they showed up, she went outside. Richard was still there, so she showed the officers the text and explained to them that Richard was pounding on her door and she felt threatened. The officers gave him a warning and asked him to leave the premises. Still, knowing Richard now knew where she lived, she wasn't comfortable. In fact, she didn't want to leave her apartment the next night, and when she looked out the peephole again, she saw Richard sitting on the stairs leading up to her apartment, waiting. She once again called the police, and for a second time, the police came and gave Richard another warning, asking him to once again leave the premises. Tina begged them to arrest him and charge him, but they seemed unwilling to do so, saying he wasn't an imminent threat, shockingly. Tina called the guy friend the following few days to come escort her out of her apartment anytime she'd leave to be safe, and Richard was no longer there. But a week later, she received a text from a random number saying, "Are you home?" She didn't answer and blocked the number. Since the police department was unwilling to do anything, Tina ended up moving apartments because of this harassment. This next one was sent to me by a girl named Marissa, who had been contacted by a crazy ex who she hadn't spoken to in years. She dated her ex Dylan on and off for 3 years, and in her words, she didn't have a backbone when she would see him. And even though their relationship was kind of abusive, she'd find herself constantly going back to him. After their final breakup, Marissa asked Dylan to stop contacting her and to pretend she didn't exist. This infuriated him even more, to the point where he knocked on her front door while her parents were home. Her father had to open the door to Dylan, practically trying to fight him when he wouldn't let him in. Things were finally broken off, seemingly for good, when the police got involved. Due to Dylan's history with violence, Marissa's parents convinced her to get a restraining order against him. This, however, didn't prove to be an end-all. For a while, there had been no contact from Dylan. Marissa had blocked any form of contact from him, but there are, of course, other ways around that, what with fake numbers and fake social media accounts. In June, 2 months after the order of protection had been processed, Marissa got a request on her Instagram from a random account named Kyle. It looked like a regular person, so she allowed it to follow her, but she didn't follow it back. Sometime in June, Marissa had posted a story on her Instagram on a date with a guy she had been talking to, in which she tagged the guy she was on the date with. Shortly after, the guy received death threats in all capitals from the Kyle account, and Marissa received a DM as well, saying he's disgustingly ugly. It was pretty clear this was a fake account now, probably run by Dylan attempting to keep tabs on what's going on in Marissa's life. After using Instagram's feature to block the account and any new ones the person makes, she hoped that would be the end of it. After a few weeks of no attempted contact from Dylan, Marissa one night was sitting in her kitchen on her laptop doing homework,
when she got a text message from a random number. It was a picture of her sitting there at the counter on her laptop, taken from outside the kitchen window. She was home alone at this time, so it couldn't have been any of her siblings trying to scare her. She looked out the window to see no one, but the picture was clearly taken moments ago, so someone was out there. She closed the blind to the window and called her dad. While on the phone with him, she saw Dylan outside in the backyard at the door, attempting to slide it open. Marissa's father called 911 for his daughter as he rushed home. Dylan was calling into the house at Marissa, demanding she open the door, getting angrier as time went on and she yelled at him to leave her alone. Dylan got so angry that he punched the glass and broke a hole in it, causing him to start screaming in pain and anger as Marissa saw blood gushing from his hand. Dylan was still in the backyard as police arrived to the house. Marissa grabbed the order of protection document to show them as Dylan was already in handcuffs. Dylan was charged and sentenced to 3 years in prison for violation of the order of protection and vandalism. This allows Marissa and her family some time to breathe and feel safe, but ideally when he's released, they should probably not be living in that same house anymore for their own safety. This last one goes to show why it's probably best not to entertain random numbers texting you for too long. This one comes from a young girl who I'll refer to as Nicole. She was 14 when this happened, living with her parents in a New York City suburb. Next door is another family of 4 with 2 sons. The sons are both older than Nicole and her sister. The younger son, who was 18, named Gene, had tried to talk to Nicole on several occasions despite their age difference. He was a senior in their high school when she was a freshman, which is how they knew each other at all. Whenever Nicole would be outside, Gene would conveniently come out of his house at the same time and always try to talk to her. He would often try to walk to school with her too. Nicole says Gene is slightly unusual, but she can't tell if he's on the spectrum or not. Still, in the past she's tried to be nice to him, and has agreed to walk to school with him before, mostly because it's only a 10-minute walk. Gene has attempted to get Nicole's number multiple times, and she always politely rejected him, saying she's not looking for anything with anyone at the moment. According to her, it was mildly creepy but somewhat innocent behavior, until he started becoming more pushy. When Gene started to make Nicole uncomfortable by seemingly waiting outside for her and invading her personal space, she started asking her mom to drive her to school in the morning to avoid Gene following her or waiting for her. This got him to stop waiting around for her, but things worsened in a different way. One night, Nicole had a boy from school over in her room. Her bedroom is upstairs. The two were sitting on her bed, and Nicole got a text from an unfamiliar number. The text was very unsettling and alarming, because it said, "I thought you said you're not looking for anyone at the moment." Nicole replied, "Is this Gene?" And he replied, "Maybe." Nicole asked him how he got her number, and he said, "You gave it to me, remember?" But she knew for a fact she didn't give it to him, and she told him that. He ignored her confrontation and said, "Who is that in your bed?" This brought the interaction to a much more invasive level, because now it meant that Gene hadn't just seen the two of them enter through the front of the house, but rather he'd been watching them through the window. Nicole looked out her window, which looked to the neighboring house, at a window to a dark room. The light in this room was never on, and it was thought to be a big closet or spare room. But since the light was out, she couldn't see if Gene was standing at that window or not. She lowered the blind and showed her parents the texts. Nicole's parents went next door and had a conversation with Gene's parents, and learned that Gene allegedly has schizoid personality disorder, but whether or not that diagnosis was accurate wouldn't justify creepy, stalkerish behavior like that. Gene never admitted how he was able to get Nicole's number, but there could be multiple explanations, like getting it through a mutual acquaintance or buying it through a public records website like White Pages. Whether Gene's parents' diagnosis of their son was accurate or not, Nicole knew something was not completely normal about him, and she became afraid to leave her house because of him. Nicole's mom continued to drive her to school after this, and for the sake of both of their daughters' happiness, the family moved to another house in the neighborhood not long after this. Gene has not bothered Nicole since.
This happened back at a magical, delicate age when I still believed in Santa Claus. It was Christmas Eve night, or technically Christmas at that point. The time, I have no idea. All I know is it was late and everyone in my house was probably asleep. I I woke up randomly to what I don't know, but I was probably extremely thirsty. I had to get out of my bed and walk all the way downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. There were night lights on in the living room and kitchen, so I didn't have to turn on any lights to see where I was going. Whenever I was thirsty when I was a little kid, I'd always decide to finish the glass in the kitchen instead of bring it up to my room. I don't know why, just one of those stupid things I did as a kid. As I was sipping the water, I heard noises come from down in the den, where we had our Christmas tree. It sounded like a big bag. I peered my head around the wall leading down the stairway to the den, but it was a little too dark to see who could be down there. I actually thought maybe it was my mom, so I started walking down the stairs, and the rustling of the bag stopped. I turned down the couch side lamp, and there I was, greeted with a massive man, both in height and size, wearing a red suit and hat and a familiar long white beard. It was Santa Claus. He waved me over, and I nervously but excitedly walked over to him. He patted my head and said he was just delivering my presents from his black bag. I looked at the bag, which seemed to be full of small boxes. I tried to get a peek in the bag, but he stopped me and said, No, don't do that. It's a surprise." I noticed there were already some presents under the tree. He turned me around and whispered in my ear I need to go back to bed. For some reason I didn't go. I just turned around and kept looking at Santa. Eventually, he actually started walking me up the stairs, telling me we need to be quiet. He asked me which way my room was, and then he told me to go up the second flight of stairs. That was when I actually obeyed him. I looked down the stairs when I was at the top, and all I saw was the eerie figure of the Santa Claus looking up at me. I realized he turned off the nightlight as I was walking up the stairs. I went to my room and shut the door, excited that I just saw Santa. As I tried to fall back asleep, I heard a loud bang from downstairs in the den. The sound traveled all the way back up to my room. I assumed that was Santa leaving the house. The next morning, I woke up early to my mom's screams downstairs. I ran down to the den, where my mom and dad already were, to a disturbing and confusing scene for my young self. There were no presents under the tree, and the sliding window was broken. I don't mean the glass was shattered, I mean it was slammed shut so hard it got knocked off the sliding mechanism. I confusedly asked my parents what happened, and explained that I saw Santa last night. When I told them this, they frantically tried getting as much info out of me as possible. My dad called the police, and when I asked him about the story for fresh details before writing this, he said the 911 operator said on the line that 2 other calls for the same incident had come in that morning. Apparently a man dressed as Santa Claus was targeting certain houses with accessible windows, and he was stealing the gifts under their Christmas trees. I believe there's a special place in hell for that man. My parents had to tell me later that day that Santa isn't real, and that should anything like that ever happen again, not to trust it. I once worked as a night security guard for a brief, horrible part of my life. It was for many places, but for the longest time, a mall in Chicago, which I'll leave the name out so that the story can in no way get traced back to me. As the lone night security guard in a huge city mall, it was very relaxing and laid back. But of course, working graveyard hours was the worst, especially when I had to do it on Christmas Eve night. I did my regular pacing back and forth the wide halls of the mall, occasionally having a seat by the big center Christmas tree which would stay lit 24/7. After getting a coffee from the security lounge section, I stepped back into the hall and noticed all the way on the other side of the mall, a light was on in one of the stores. A light that wasn't on before, I swear it. No one was supposed to be in the mall besides me. I jogged over to the store and set my coffee down under a plant. It was a jewelry shop. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. So how could anyone be in there? The light in the store suddenly started flickering, so naturally I had to chalk it up as faulty wiring, false alarm. I knelt down to pick up my coffee again, and as I looked up, I saw someone's head behind the front counter of the store. Just their head, like they were hiding. But it happened so fast. One moment there was light, the next darkness, and when the light flicked back on again, the head was gone. I literally rubbed my eyes and shook my head, wondering was I seeing things. I took my master keyring off my belt and fiddled for the key to the store. I didn't know where the light switch was, and to be honest, I was way too freaked out to check behind that counter with nothing but a flashlight. I shut the door and relocked it and walked back to my post by the Christmas tree. I started chugging my coffee because I really thought I was losing it after seeing what I saw. The lights in that store all the ways down on the other side of the hall were still off, but I heard a click and then a bang echo down in my direction, followed by someone running across one side of the hall to the other, before disappearing in an intersecting exit hallway. I sprang up and almost spit out the remainder of my coffee. I ran down the hall till I came to the intersecting smaller hallway. This hallway, which led to one of the exits, had a bunch of massage chairs, coin-operated kiddie rides, and the public restrooms. I didn't see anywhere else that person could have gone besides the restroom, as the exit doors were all locked from both sides. I got to the door of the men's bathroom and stopped, once again faced with the fear of confronting whoever was in that mall with me. I cracked the door open just slightly, enough for me to start speaking into the bathroom, saying whoever's in here needs to get out before I call the cops. There was a crying and moaning type noise coming from inside the restroom. I opened the door fully and realized it was coming from one of the stalls. I repeated what I said at the door, but the crying sounds didn't stop. I knelt down in front of the stall to get a peek under, and I saw two black shoes facing the door, facing me. It seemed the person was just facing the stall door, making these crying noises. The crying stopped, and then the next thing I saw was the person on the other side of the stall quickly get on their knees and look under the door back at me. I recognized it as the same person from behind that counter in that store. I got back on my feet and left the bathroom to call the police and explain the situation. As a security guard, I never encountered anything like this overnight, and I did know how to deal with it. I definitely did not want to make it physical. A couple police officers came to the doors at the end of the hall, and I let them in. We all went to the men's bathroom again, and the stall door was still shut, and the man was still inside. For the longest time, the officers demanded he come out with his hands up. After a while of him refusing to listen, the male officer started kicking in the stall door until it broke open. The two officers apprehended the nutjob inside the stall. As they walked him out of the mall, though, the man had his head turned to look at me the entire time. I looked away. His dead eyes staring into my soul genuinely disturbed me. He looked like he wanted to kill me. Before he was put in the back of the police car, he said my name, and I immediately got the chills. The officers said they would find out who he is and everything, and they went on their way. My shift ended a few hours later, and for the remainder of my time working at that mall, I was always paranoid every time I'd turn a corner that he'd be standing there. Our parents had our youngest sibling much later than they had my brother and I. This happened last year when I was 18, my older brother was 24, and our youngest sibling Rachel was just 2. I was home from college for winter break. My older brother would be returning home from out of state in a few days, and my parents were on a couple's vacation. It was about a week before Christmas, and I was tasked with taking care of Rachel until my parents got back. My time watching Rachel consisted of a lot of sitting around the house, having friends over, and just watching TV and movies. I would let Rachel play in the living room with her toys as I'd watch TV with no lights on but the Christmas tree, which I always find to make watching TV a lot more relaxing. When Rachel started to get tired, I brought her up to her room, changed her, and put her in the crib upstairs. I made sure to turn on the baby monitor as my parents did every night just to make sure I could hear her if she got restless. Something to note, Rachel's room shares a bathroom with my mom and dad's room. So basically, both my parents' and Rachel's rooms are connected to a bathroom, which thus connects the 2 bedrooms in a sense. I went back downstairs to watch TV. I think I was watching The Grinch when sounds started coming from the baby monitor. Distorted, human-like noises. It didn't sound like Rachel, so I hurried back upstairs to Rachel's room. I burst in so quickly and aggressively that she immediately awoke and started crying. I looked around the room naturally. Then I picked Rachel up and started gently rocking her. But I realized this didn't help. She was probably too big for it. So I put her back down in the crib and started tickling her, then gently whispering her back to sleep. When she had her eyes closed again, I left the room. A few minutes later, I heard Rachel crying again through the baby monitor. I ran up to see what's wrong, and she was standing in her crib, pointing at the bathroom door, which was cracked open. I honestly didn't remember if it had been cracked open like that earlier or not. I went to check the bathroom, and it was clear. I told her calmly she's imagining things. I wasn't sure how much she understood of what I was saying, but after a few minutes in there with her, I got her to settle back down. Once again, I went down to the living room to continue watching TV. The orange light on the baby monitor once again started going off. I felt like I was in a horror movie scenario. I could distinctly hear a man's whispering coming from the baby monitor. I ran back up to that room faster than ever, burst through the door to Rachel's crying again. I went to pick her up to get her out of there. And when I turned for the door, I looked into the dark bathroom, which now had the door wide open. There was a man in my parents' room, and he started walking through the bathroom towards me and Rachel. I ran out of the house to the neighbor's house while holding Rachel. Our neighbor Judy let us in and let me use her phone to call the cops. They didn't find anyone, but Judy let us stay the night at her place regardless. The next morning, Judy went back to my house with me to look around as support. The house seemed clear. However, I couldn't help but look around the house to try and find out how he got in, but I just couldn't, and it made no sense. A couple weeks later, my mom sent me to the attic to put some of the Christmas decorations away, and you wouldn't believe what I found up there. In the corner of the attic was a bed of blankets and a pillow, hidden behind a bunch of ripped up boxes stacked up as a wall. I immediately associated it to that man in our house. We have no idea how long that man was actually in our house for.
These are 3 honeymoon stories. Oftentimes, newlyweds take their honeymoons in foreign countries where the locals may not always speak their native tongue. In one of these stories, that exact scenario proved to be a problem, as a matter of fact. Learning a second or third language can prove to be a very useful skill that will come in handy many times in your life, and the app Babbel has now made learning a new language easier and more fun. All you need is 10 to 15 minutes a day, and within 3 weeks, you'll be quickly picking up a new language. Unlike other language apps and websites that may teach you robotic phrases that not even natives may use, Babbel thrives on preparing you for conversational language that you will be able to use in the real world. Also be sure to check out Babbel Live, where you can also take online classes in real time for a more personal approach. Right now, if you buy 6 months, Babbel is offering you an additional 6 months for free. Check the link in the description.
For my wife and I's honeymoon, we went to Hawaii. Our hotel was on Maui, which we heard was the best island for couples and honeymoons. The hotel was on the beach, and every night they'd have torch shows, luau's, and other kinds of live entertainment. During the first few days, we did a lot of drinking and restaurant hopping. On our 4th day, we wanted to explore one of the jungle hiking trails, as there are a bunch on the island, and it was on our bucket list for the trip. We drove our rental car a long drive to the nearest parking lot to PPY Trail, a long scenic trail in the bamboo forest in the jungle. The trail would eventually lead to numerous waterfalls and hidden ponds that you could swim in. We were told about it by some locals and other tourists, so that's what we wanted to do. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but the parking lot wasn't just for this one trail. Walking down the path for a while, it truly was just a wall of bamboo on either side of us. It was truly an environment I'd never seen before. My wife stopped us and pointed at a small animal slightly off the trail. It was a mongoose. It was stopped, looking at us, and we both thought it was adorable. My wife started approaching it slowly, bent down to appear smaller and less intimidating. I did the same. Of course, the little creature ran away pretty swiftly, and my wife chased after it goofily. I followed suit. As we got deeper into the jungle, straying away from the trail, we heard the sound of water. It was a waterfall nearby. We followed the sound of it until we came to this beautiful pond with a small waterfall pouring into it. We dipped our feet in the water, and it was a surprisingly comfortable temperature, and it was deep enough to submerge ourselves in. So we decided to do a little skinny dipping, knowing how unlikely it would be that anyone else would be here. Well, apparently we were wrong about that, because as we were in the water, my wife shrieked and said, "Oh my God," as she pointed at some older man in a straw hat with a long gray beard standing in the jungle half behind a tree, staring at us. I'm too nice of a person, so I waved for some dumb reason, instead of yelling to stop creeping on us, because that's what it looked like he was doing. He didn't wave back, he didn't smile, he didn't even move. I looked at my wife and said we should leave, but she didn't want to step out of the water naked for him to see. I kind of agreed. So now I called out to him, asking if he needed something, and only then he called back in a surprisingly deep voice, saying he's looking for his dog. I said we haven't seen it, and then he walked away. I said to my wife we need to go immediately. We got out of the water and got dressed, then tried to find the trail. But we couldn't find it. We strayed far enough away from it that we were apparently lost. We had lost the direction we came from, and there was no cell reception out here. It was getting late in the day, and panic was setting in. By the time the sun was setting, my wife was in tears. All the while, as it got darker and darker, we felt as though we were being followed, hearing footsteps every now and then. It reached the point where the jungle was completely dark now, and we had to use our flashlights on our dying phones. But when we heard footsteps coming from behind us again, I whispered to my wife to turn it off to not reveal ourselves. We felt like we were being followed for hours. After turning out the lights, it was pitch black for a second, until my eyes started adjusting to the darkness. As soon as that happened, I noticed the figure about 10 feet away, and it was slowly creeping closer. I backed away slowly as I pushed my wife behind me. I said, "What do you want?" in a very nervous voice. My wife apparently didn't see him, because she turned her phone's flashlight back on and aimed it at the figure, revealing it to be that old man with a straw hat and beard holding a hacksaw. We both screamed. My wife let out a scream of fear while I screamed, "Go, go, go," to her. We ran through the jungle without any lights. There was just enough light to barely see where we were going. We ran and ran and ran, thankfully wearing sneakers and hiking attire. Eventually I got cell reception, so we followed the map back to the parking lot we came from, which took a good 10 to 15 minutes of running. We made it back to the car, and at that point, it felt like we were given a new chance at life. The next day we went straight to the Maui Police Department and reported the whole incident in an attempt to warn other tourists who may be visiting that specific trail. After that, we tried the best we could to continue our honeymoon, but it definitely put a damper on things. My honeymoon was in Sicily. Our hotels were in Palermo, Cefalù, and Messina in that order. While in Messina, we did most of the sightseeing at sites like Taormina. Messina was packed with beautiful old architecture and museums to explore, which is what my wife Patricia and I enjoy the most. Messina is a port-heavy city, and like the rest of Sicily, there are a lot of English-speaking tourists, but also a lot of Italian-speaking locals. We don't really speak any Italian beyond maybe an elementary level. We'd have a lot of locals approaching us trying to sell us things. At night, the vibe where we were was fun. Lots of music, people drinking and dancing and whatnot. We were partaking a little bit, while also continuing to walk around and explore. The night got the better of us, and we ended up getting pretty drunk, and the time flew by. Pretty soon it was past midnight, and things outside on the streets were simmering down. We took a wrong turn back to our hotel, and kind of lost our way. Eventually we ended up in this sketchy alleyway, and Patricia was getting upset that we seemed to be entering a sketchy area. I put my arm around her to make her feel safer. Suddenly some guy came up to us obnoxiously close, speaking Italian like a machine gun, so quick we couldn't even attempt to understand any words. We couldn't tell if he was angry or concerned, but he seemed frantic. He kept saying this word phantasma. At that moment, I didn't know what that word meant. I pushed the guy out of our faces and walked Patricia and I quickly out of the alleyway. He yelled more stuff at us in Italian. I didn't understand a single word of it. As we got away from him, I googled what the word fantasma meant, because it was the only word that he kept repeating that stood out. It means ghost, and when we found that out, we looked at each other. I couldn't help but nervously laugh to try to get Patricia to laugh as well, simply because it sounded ridiculous. We were in this dark, sketchy area of the city for sure. There didn't seem to be anyone else around. We'd normally call an Uber, but it's not even a thing in Sicily, so we had to walk it. I have to admit, I was probably as uncomfortable as Patricia, as we'd heard certain parts of the city were unsafe at night. There was this quiet woman's crying sound coming from behind us all of a sudden. We both heard it, and we both looked back. There was this young but freakishly tall woman about 10 yards away from us, walking slowly in our direction. Her face was buried in her hands. Her height was actually unnaturally tall. She looked taller than me. In fact, it was so creepy that even Patricia, who's usually a sweet, nurturing person, whispered that we should get the hell away from her. We jogged down this narrow street and turned left to another alleyway. And we turned back again to the crying sounds. That woman was now at the end of this alleyway, just behind us, but still walking at the same slow speed, her face still buried in her hands. It felt like we were in this channel of alleyways and narrow one-way streets, and every time we turned, we'd still hear the crying behind us. It only stopped when we made it back to, I guess, what you'd call one of the main roads with other civilian traffic besides us. From there, we simply walked back to the hotel. Patricia kept insisting what we saw was a ghost, and every time she said it, it gave me chills. This story doesn't do it any justice in explaining just how disturbing seeing that tall, lanky woman walking towards us in that alleyway was. Not to mention that guy say the word ghost in Italian over and over. I'm not ruling it out as some kind of crazy over-the-top joke. For all I know, we ended up on some Italian YouTube prank channel. But Patricia insists on believing it was actually a ghost we saw, and it still gives me chills thinking about that possibility. We aren't the richest couple out there. We both work 9-to-5 jobs to make ends meet. We're doing all right now, but back when we got married, we were struggling. So when it came time for our honeymoon, we couldn't go all out and blast all our money. My wife, who I'll choose to keep nameless, was doing research for affordable beach getaways, and she found a private house in the Bahamas for 3 nights on Airbnb, so we went with that. After flight tickets and the cost for the rental, it didn't even come out to that much. Upon arrival, we entered the code for the padlock on the door to let ourselves into the home. It had a spacious living room and kitchen, a large bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a big back deck that led to the private beach. We spent all of the first day on the beach, then walked to a nearby restaurant for dinner. When we got back, this is where the weird things started happening. As soon as we walked in the door, we noticed things seemed like they were in the wrong places, like our sandals, our bags, and so on. Nothing was missing though, so we accused each other of having moved the stuff beforehand. We jumped in the hot tub that was on the back deck for a while, until we both heard something from inside the house, like a bang or a door closing. I got out from the hot tub to check, dripping all over the floor of the house. All the doors were closed though. I didn't remember if they were open earlier or not. Regardless, I checked the room and it was clear of any intruders, as well as the bathroom. I went back outside to grab a towel and put my clothes on. I was done in the hot tub anyway, and so was my wife, though I was growing a little suspicious, or cautious you might say. The second day we sat on the beach for a while again, then went to some of the touristy areas of the Bahamas and did dinner. When we got back, again, we felt like things were different. Our stuff seemed to be in the same spots, but the bathroom and bedroom doors were open, and we didn't remember keeping them open. We knew it was possible we were being paranoid now and didn't actually remember how the doors were left, but still it was getting uncomfortable now. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked, and we skipped the hot tub that night. We just watched movies on the TV in the living room, as there was a bunch of included streaming services on there. There was no upstairs to the house, yet we thought we could hear little taps and whatnot above our heads. Maybe the roof? Maybe an iguana or some similar creature? At this point, we were even starting to think there might be some kind of Bahamian creepy crawly in the house. It seemed like a more logical explanation as to there being an intruder in this relatively small space. That night, I was in bed before my wife. She was in the shower when I heard her scream. I basically exploded out of bed to run into the bathroom. She turned the water off by then and told me that there was something in the vent above the shower. I got on the ledge of the tub and looked in it, but it was too dark in there. However, I did hear some tiny noises coming from in there. This almost confirmed that there was a rodent or some small creature in the vents of the house. Still, we had one more day, it wasn't our problem. We went to bed together. The next thing I remember was waking up to my wife shaking me. She had this horrified look on her face that immediately sent shivers down my spine. She told me to listen, and the silence of the room allowed me to hear it. This frantic whispering sound coming from the ceiling, particularly one of the ceiling vents. That was it. I grabbed my phone to call the owner of the Airbnb. I heard the ringing, but simultaneously I heard this vibrating sound from above us. Immediately I started to think, wait, is there an upstairs that the owner is living in? The vibrating above us stopped almost as quickly as it started, but the call was still ringing on my end. Curiously, I took my phone's flashlight and aimed it up through the vents, and for just a split second, I saw someone looking down through the vent into the room. Most notably, I saw their eyes. We packed all of our important stuff as quickly as we could. It took all of about 30 seconds and we were out the front door. We ran through the sandy dirt road until we came to a street, then we stopped to catch our breaths. We stayed in a cheap hotel that night and the next night as well. The last day we spent most of it waiting at the airport, but we reported this incident to Airbnb and we got all of our money back, and I'm pretty sure Airbnb banned the owner of that house's account. We didn't pursue anything further with legal action, as we were just happy to get our money back. Nothing of ours was missing, but who the hell knows what kind of shady shit he was doing there when we weren't in the house. It was sometime in April, peak corona time in my state. Quarantining and lockdown were still in effect. There was nothing to do on Friday and Saturday nights besides Zoom calls with your friends. It was like a week after I finally hopped on the wave and agreed to jump on a Zoom call with my 4 friends, Ashley, Haley, Sylvia, and Alexa. It was a Friday night, and it was supposed to be our little Zoom drinking party. We were going to be playing drinking games and just staying up until the early hours of the morning. Ashley shared the link to join the Zoom call in our iMessage group chat. We joined one at a time, first Ashley, then me, then Haley and Sylvia. It seemed they were all on their laptops. I was the only one on my phone, so I switched to my laptop as well. It took a little while for Alexa to finally join, but when she joined, her screen was black. We all joked around, chanting Alexa's name and whatever, asking her what's up with her webcam. She started typing into the text chat of the Zoom call saying she didn't know what was wrong with her webcam and microphone, that it said both were offline. We continued to joke around about it, but also tried helping her, though we didn't really know how to be of much assistance with that. Eventually she typed in the chat, "BRB, I'm gonna go try to figure this out." So we all went on to our drinking and just chatting on our video chat, while we figured Alexa was doing whatever to try to fix her computer. But something randomly happened sometime into our call. Something completely unexpected that kind of scarred all of us. Alexa's cam suddenly started working, and her box went from black to showing an old creepy man doing something I really don't want to repeat. When he noticed the camera turned on, he jumped to close the laptop, and the screen went dark again. The 4 of us screamed and started freaking out. We tried calling Alexa, but now it seemed her phone was off. We didn't have her mom or sister's number, so we all agreed to drive over to Alexa's place to see what was going on. Her mom answered the door in her robe, looking concerned. We asked her if Alexa was home. She said yes and called her down. Alexa never responded though. Her mother said she had just gotten home an hour ago, but that Alexa's door was locked half an hour earlier. We all explained what happened on the Zoom call, and she freaked out and ran upstairs to bang on Alexa's door. That got no answers. We all got a sickly feeling when we realized what could be going on. Alexa's mom called the cops that second, and when Officer Perry showed up, we told him everything. He called for backup and went upstairs to knock on the door and tried to reason with whoever could be in there. When there was no response, he began to kick the door down. When he finally broke through the door, there was no one on the bed. The laptop and phone were left on the bed, but no one was in the room. The window was wide open, enough for someone to crawl through and hop outside down to the awning roof below. We all found Alexa in the basement minutes later. She was hiding under a blanket in the corner of the room. She said when she was home alone, she saw some older man with a big knife sticking out of his pocket in the living room, so she snuck down to the basement and hid. She didn't know when it was safe to come out of hiding, as she couldn't hear her mother getting home. Police backup finally showed up, and the information of the break-in and the man was sent to the local news outlets to alert people to be on the lookout. It's crazy how that Zoom call might have saved Alexa and her mother's lives. A few weeks ago, my friends and I decided to hold a Zoom reunion, as we had not seen each other for quite some time, and all of us finally had the time to chat since there was a lockdown in our country. We're all college students, and most of us had lost contact with each other, so we decided to post on our social media that we would be holding a Zoom reunion, which was open to all the alumni of our old school. We got responses from many people, and we even accepted people we didn't know as long as they knew our mutual friends. We wanted it to be a big social event and didn't really care who joined. Finally, the day of the reunion arrived. I scheduled a meeting and posted it on my Instagram story because there were too many people to individually text, which I now realize was a big mistake because I had basically given everyone access to join the Zoom call. The Zoom meeting began normally, with all of us excited to meet our old friends. We made some new friends through our mutual friends, and we were having a grand time, when someone called Sat_An_20 unmuted their mic and started making groaning sounds. We had a friend named Anne, so we thought it was just her pranking us. We texted her to stop because it was getting annoying, but to our surprise she texted back apologizing because she hadn't attended the call due to prior engagements. We were surprised and asked this Anne person to open their video and show us their face or they would be removed from the meeting. They didn't show their face, so I removed them from the meeting. The Zoom call resumed and we were all joking about the incident. Suddenly, my network strength became weak, and I had to leave the meeting. I joined back soon after, but Sat_An_20 had somehow taken the opportunity and re-entered the meeting in the few seconds that we unlocked it. This time they began to share their screen and displayed a video of a black tunnel on loop. We were terrified, and a lot of people were leaving the meeting because of it, but my friends and I were determined to find the person who was destroying our reunion. We constantly tried to remove them from the meeting, but the second my friend's network connection weakened, somehow the Sat_An_20 person became the host. There was nothing we could do now. The account was still playing the video on loop and chanting something in a strange language. We could have left the meeting, but really wanted to know who was disrupting it. Suddenly the video stopped, and Sat_An_20 started talking in a distorted voice about how my brother Rav had completed the ritual and attained salvation, and we could take their help and do the same too. Here's the thing. I had a twin brother who died before birth. My parents had wanted to name him Rav. They told me when I was very young about his prenatal death and begged me to never talk about him. Only my grandparents and parents knew about him, as the subject was too painful to disclose to others. I had always wanted a twin, and blaming myself for his death, I never told anyone about him. Soon after, we had moved to a new city. I was certain that the only people who knew about my brother in the city were my parents. I had not told even my best friends about him. I had no idea how this Sat_An_20 person knew about him. They truly had no way of knowing that I knew about. With shaking hands, and now without a doubt convinced that this was a supernatural occurrence, I wordlessly exited the meeting. I do not know what happened afterwards. I didn't respond to my friends' texts and have since not talked to them. To this day, I know this is an experience I will not soon forget. In April of this year, my school had made a virtual classroom thing where we would do all of our assignments online on websites like Google Classroom and whatnot. They also told us about a new tool called Zoom, where students and teachers can all have a virtual meeting to talk about schoolwork and stuff. Well, one day in May, after I finished my assignments, my dad went out on a night shift at his job. So it was only my mom and my mom was asleep. I called my friends, and we all agreed to try a Zoom call out with each other to catch up on how everyone has been, and it also eventually ended with us playing some console games like Call of Duty. At one point, around 10 p.m., we were playing Modern Warfare, and all of a sudden, one of my friends, who I'll call Jack for privacy reasons, suddenly told me that he saw a very sudden blurred movement behind me in my room, but he wasn't sure because my lights were off, and the only light was from the TV in my room. I have a somewhat small room with only my bed, a drawer next to my bed, a closet in the left corner of the room, and my TV in the front. That's when I noticed that my pillow was on the floor. I went over to pick it up, and I just dismissed it, thinking it accidentally fell or something. So I just went back to play with my friends. About 10 minutes passed by, and Jack once again says he swears he sees movement behind me in my room. When I turned around, I saw that the pillow had fallen again in the exact same spot. This time I became anxious because I knew 100% I put the pillow in a place that it couldn't possibly fall without someone or something moving it. I bend down slowly to pick it up, and then I hear Jack scream. I put the pillow on the bed and rushed over to my laptop sitting on my chair to ask him what was wrong. All he said was to look under my bed, and I saw it. I saw two glowing eyes which were lit up by the TV screen. Once the person realized that I saw them, they immediately jumped out and tried to grab me. I instinctively swung my arm at their head, and I hit him right in the nose. He looked to be at least 45 and had long, dry, straight hair that looked like it hadn't been cut or washed in at least a year. He had a scratchy-looking beard and was a very skinny but tall guy. He looked to be about 6'3". He fell onto my bed, and I could see his nose was bleeding, so I took my chance and ran to my mom's room and locked the door. I could hear his footsteps stomping through the house coming towards the room, so I immediately told my mom to call the police despite her groggily shouting at me to tell her what was happening. She called the cops, and by then I could hear his footsteps as he was going from room to room to find where I went. When he came to the room we were in, he tried the handle, and when he saw it was locked, he knew we were in the room. But he didn't bang on the door like I thought he would. Instead, I heard a small chuckle, and then I looked under the little crack under the door, and I could see his feet standing there. As soon as I looked under, he looked through the crack as well, and I could see his bloodshot eye. I also saw a couple drops of blood on the floor, and then on the other side of the door, I heard "You'll pay for that" in a psychotic, high-pitched, childish voice. When I backed away, he screamed like a madman and started banging on the door over and over. I started covering my ears, trying to shut the sound out, and I could see my mom crying. Just then, we hear the sirens outside, but the man doesn't stop banging and shouting. The police knock on the door, and when they hear the man, they immediately knock the door down and come in, literally like something from a movie. I heard the man stop, and I thought the police already got him. When I opened the door, I saw the man facing the two officers, looking like he was going to attack them. When he stepped towards them, one of them shot a taser at him, and he immediately fell and started shaking violently. They cuffed him and took him out to the car, and a third officer came to question me and my mom. I told him the whole story, and then the three officers started searching for the place of breaking and entering, and it turned out that he had broken in through the window in my dad's office room, and they found a small axe and drill under my bed in my room. We later found out this man wasn't documented, and no one knew who he was, and he didn't appear to have any family. He was sent to a mental institution, but that's not the worst part. The police later tried to find out where the man originally lived, and all the man told them was that he lived in the woods near my home. When the police went searching for his home for any evidence, they found a small secluded area in the woods with a small wooden shack. When they went in, they told us that they found multiple weapons, bags of old food, and worst of all, 2 pictures of me, one of me asleep, which was taken from inside the house outside my bedroom door, and one of me eating dinner from outside the window. I hope nothing like this ever happens to anyone, and I hope no one else has to add another bad memory to the long list from this terrible year. This first photo that you're about to see in a few moments was taken by a viewer named Jane. Jane had met a man named Jeremy off a dating app. She hadn't been on any dating apps since her at the time recent breakup, and she thought it was finally fun to get back into the dating scene. After swiping away on some dating app and conversing with a few people, she matched Jeremy, who seemed to be the kind of guy she would feel comfortable with and connect with. Jane describes herself as a good-looking but shy and reserved girl, and she described Jeremy as an above-average-looking guy with a buzz cut who was exactly her type. He had a full tattoo sleeve on his left arm and had mostly pictures of himself outdoors. Most notably, his first picture was of him leaning on his pickup truck with his dog in the bed of the truck and the woods in the background. The two struck up a conversation about his dog and then dogs in general, and eventually the conversation segued to local bars that the two would frequent. Jeremy picked up Jane, and the two ended up going to a bar called Lansdowne Street, and in her words, kind of hitting it off. Jeremy dropped off Jane at home, but beforehand he seemed a bit reluctant, wanting their little date to continue, even at one point implying that she should go back to his place with him. She politely rejected him, and that was the end of their first date. The two would text back and forth the next few days, and saw each other again the following Friday, where they went out to get fast food and ice cream. After chatting in Jeremy's car driving around for a bit, he ended up taking them to his house, where he started trying to get her to come into his house. She rejected this request over and over until it got creepy, and then he started getting a bit physical. Jane said she didn't know if he was trying to physically remove her from the car or if it was him trying to make some kind of physical advance on her. Either way, she shoved his arms off of her and left the car, walking quickly down the street. Jeremy called her a few times, but she ignored him and kept walking. She had her older brother Chris come pick her up. Shockingly, after a long back and forth over text, Jeremy cursed Jane out, but then minutes later switched his tone to apologetic and regretful. Jane blocked his number, figuring he was not what he initially seemed and he might be crazy. Now this is when the photo that I mentioned earlier comes into play. That night, Jane was awoken to a sound outside her window. It was the sound of the recycling bin full of glass and cans on the side of the house being kicked. It was late at night, so this was cause for alarm. She got out of the bed to look out her bedroom window. Upon lifting up the blind and looking around outside for just a second, she saw something that made her stomach churn. In this picture that she took, you see Jeremy standing in the darkness with his hood over his head, facing the window. She managed to not scream and be brave enough to take this picture when she saw him out there. Jeremy tried opening the window when he was seen and started yelling Jane's name repeatedly. Jane screamed for her brothers and her dad to help, and by this point Jeremy had taken off. According to Jane, the whole block had to hear his 8-cylinder pickup truck flooring it down the street. Tempted to text Jeremy threats of calling the police, she showed restraint and brought the info to the police the next day and filed for a restraining order using the texts and pictures as proof of reason. She sent a photo of the restraining order to Jeremy, which went unresponded to because she never unblocked him. What Jeremy planned to do at Jane's window is not exactly clear, but even if it wasn't to break in and he wanted to talk to her, that wouldn't be okay either. And after the toxic messages he sent her, nobody would assume he's a completely level-headed individual. In fact, those messages, mixed with his sneaking around her house in late hours of the night and coming to her window after being blocked, suggest he might have been a dangerous individual. What you're looking at right now is one of the many dolls made by Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian former journalist and college professor with expert knowledge of cemeteries. As a child, Anatoly began wandering through cemeteries with friends for fun, and as time went on, he developed a fascination for the dead. Decades later, this fascination led to a hobby of collecting dolls. But this hobby hid a macabre obsession that drew upon his particular interests, digging up the dead and making dolls out of their corpses. Yes, the doll you're looking at is actually made out of a dead body. After making his human dolls, he kept them in his home as his companions and possibly lovers, evident by some of the stuff he wrote about his dolls. For example, "I kissed her once, then again, then again." But the really disturbing part of this is that the dolls were in majority made from little girls aged 3 to 12, and he would apply lipstick and makeup to many of their faces. He even marked the birthday of each of his dead victims in his bedroom. His self-proclaimed expertise on cemeteries wasn't a lie, as he was able to desecrate countless graves in his hometown while evading police for years until he was finally caught after the increasing suspicion at the growing number of defiled graves in the area. When police searched his home, they found 26 life-size dolls, or rather mummified corpses, scattered throughout the house. But the police didn't know they were corpses at first, until he openly admitted to it. His parents, who lived in the same flat as him, claimed to know nothing of his activities. His parents and others who had seen the dolls stated that they did not suspect that there were dead bodies inside, but then again, who would? Not even the police suspected the dolls to be bodies at first. His parents said they thought it was just his hobby to make such big dolls and did not see anything wrong with it. During a hearing in which he sought to be released from a psychiatric hospital to care for his elderly mother and live with a new girlfriend, he refused to apologize to his victim's parents. In his mind, he thought he was doing something good, as he stated he felt great sympathy for the dead children and thought that they could be brought back to life by either science or black magic. He even went as far as to shun the parents for leaving their daughters in the cold, whereas he took them into the warmth to be reborn. Anatoly dried the corpses using a combination of salt and baking soda, and then stored the bodies in secure, dry places in and around cemeteries. Once the bodies dried, he carried them to his home, where he used various methods to make the dolls, in an attempt to give the children functional bodies to be used when he eventually discovered a way to bring them back to life, feeling that their physical remains were too decayed and ugly for them to feel comfortable or happy. While some of the parents want Anatoly locked away behind bars for life, it was determined that he suffered a form of paranoid schizophrenia and has since been held in a psychiatric hospital. From his perspective, he may have thought he was saving a bunch of young girls, but from any other perspective, it was a horrific, downright disturbing thing to do. The picture you're looking at right now is of Amy Reeves and her baby sister. The backstory behind this picture isn't as cute and wholesome as one would imagine. On this day, Amy was taking her sister out trick-or-treating for Halloween. Amy lives in the backwoods of Texas. She moved from Houston to a small town closer to Galveston, as she described to be about an hour drive towards the southeast coast. Amy's move from the big city to a very small town was much needed for her, as she was sick of the city life, and settling into a very small home with 2 acres was a nice change of scenery for her. However, she kept noticing something completely eerie from the moment she moved into the house. It had nothing to do with the property or the home, but rather something outside the home. She kept noticing every time she would pull out of her driveway, a car would follow her and go the exact route she was going. She would ignore it and move on with her day at first, but it kept happening every single time that she would leave her house. In one of the neighboring houses, the same vehicle would pull out of their driveway whenever she would pull out of hers. She very soon started to suspect that there were some ill intentions there. However, for a while, she kept ignoring it and still moved on with her day, hoping it would stop eventually. When she was returning home from work one day, something in her gut told her to take a different route home, so she listened to her gut and took a different route. Instead of taking the highway, she took the service road towards the entrance of her little neighborhood. Instead of driving straight through the neighborhood to take a left, she took a slightly sharp right at the entrance and took a 3-minute longer route back home. But even on this detour, she eventually spotted the same vehicle in her rearview mirror. As she started to speed away to try to escape the car, it started flashing her aggressively. Eventually, she makes a left turn and the car doesn't seem to follow. She proceeded home, and just as she thought she was safe and the stalker wasn't around, she realized she was wrong. The stalker's car with the brights still on was approaching, the lights becoming brighter as it got closer. By now it was clear the stalker had been following her home, even down her new route. The man pulled into his driveway and just sat there while Amy went into the house. While inside, she looked through the window out at the car, and the man must have taken notice because he started revving his engine. By this point, it was clearly a full-fledged stalker harassment situation, so Amy called the police in hopes to have them go and talk to him for her. When police arrived, she explained the whole situation the best she could, noting multiple times that she just moved in and she doesn't know the man. The police went over to the man's house to talk with him. Meanwhile, Amy went to her restroom, but she was yet to be under the realization that she had left the back door unlocked when she went outside to smoke a cigarette not too long ago. While she was in the bathroom, she heard footsteps walking towards her bedroom. She got up to shut and lock the bathroom door instantly, exposing where she was to the intruder. And seconds later, there was a knock on the wall separating the bathroom and her bedroom. Even though it was fairly obvious her cover was already blown, she remained as quiet as she could. The thought that maybe it could have been one of the police officers came up in Amy's head, but after one look out the bathroom window, that idea was out the window. Outside, she could see a police officer struggling with what appeared to be damp wood from the half-rotted shed beside the stalker's house. Amy pulled up her pants, getting ready to run to the front door. And that's when she heard it again, an aggressive knock on the other side of the wall from her bedroom. The stalker was inside her bedroom, no doubt. With not many other options other than being a sitting duck, Amy opened the bathroom door and bolted for the front door and outside to try and find an officer. But there were none in sight, not even the one that was struggling with the rotted wood moments earlier, just their empty squad car. After running around looking for the officers, she returned closer to her house where there was a commotion heard from inside, and it sounded as though there was a struggle between an officer and somebody else. Amy re-entered her house to see one of the officers on her bedroom floor in a lot of pain, who looked to be struggling holding his neck, not bleeding, but bruising as if the man punched him in the throat repeatedly or strangled him. The officer never told Amy exactly what happened because his partner called an ambulance for him, but Amy was notified later that same day that the man who was stalking her was taken into custody for assaulting and fleeing from an officer. Amy never learned why the cop's partner was struggling with the wood outside, or how exactly the one officer knew to check the inside of her house. In all likelihood, by the time the police had arrived, the stalker had already let himself into her house. And when the police didn't get an answer at the stalker's house, one of them returned to Amy's house to find the door ajar, and the rest you could figure out. The picture you saw minutes earlier of Amy and her baby sister was sent to her phone only days after moving in, and it was taken by a passing car without her even knowing it. After this entire stalker incident, it became much clearer who took the picture, though Amy still doesn't know how exactly they could have gotten her phone number.